Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto's sister has a brother complex. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. It's about time we finished this, once and for all. Don't you agree, Kurama-ni? A tall, young man said. With hair shining as bright as the sun itself, the young man had roguish, spiky blonde hair that was messy and twin bangs that reached his jawline, framing his angular face. His shining azure orbs did nothing to hide his devilishly handsome appearance, and most distinctive of all were his exotic, birthmark-like whisker marks. 3 on each cheek, making him appear more mature than his age suggested and also more akin to a feline or canine. He was wearing a battered and torn orange and black jumpsuit which was torn open at the front, exposing a fishnet bodysuit underneath which did little to hide his toned and well-muscled form. His azure orbs stared ahead, unwavering as he tightened his grip on a kunai knife in his hand. A deep rumbling voice spoke into the young man's mind. "I couldn't agree more," the voice said, "considering what she did to your friends and father." "I know," the young man replied, sorrow seeping out in waves, "that is why it ends here. I have already assimilated the memories from your father, Kurama, the greatest and most fearsome of the Biju-tailed beasts. The Kyuubi no Kitsune said, put them to good use, do not let him down." "Got it, Kurama," the blonde replied. "Uzumaki Naruto never goes back on his word." "That's the spirit, now kick her ass from here to Sunday." "That's the plan." And the woman in question was suspended in the air, her 3 cold dojutsu-enhanced eyes staring at everything before her, her expression blank and emotionless. The goddess of destruction, Otsutsuki Kagaya, truly lived up to her namesake, as the landscape around her resembled an apocalyptic graveyard of gargantuan proportions. Dead shinobi and countless destroyed wildlife littered the scene, multiple craters decorating the land for miles around, and the sky was a dull gray, as if the gods were weeping from the death and destruction. After the traitorous Uchiha Madara sealed the Jubi into himself, thus inadvertently releasing her, she had been on a rampage ever since. For countless hours, the remaining shinobi of the battered alliance who were not under the infinite Tsukuyomi slugged it out with the goddess, but they soon realized that no amount of planning, strategizing, ninjutsu, booby traps, kinjutsu, genjutsu, much less taijutsu of any kind could even put a scratch on her, much less kill her outright. Hitaki Kakashi had already exhausted his chakra reserves and was recuperating with Haruno Sakura's help, and Uchiha Obito, the traitor-turned-ally, was unconscious due to fatigue and severe chakra exhaustion. The reincarnated Hokages, the Shodai, Nidame, Sandaime and Yondaime were also powerless, as seen when the Nidame's soul was forcibly pulled out of him, turning his body into ash, leaving behind a white Zetsu clone. Uzumaki Naruto had come a long way since then. He was no longer the dense idiot that everyone knew anymore. After the merging with Asura's potent chakra, his mind had become clearer, and he was finally able to think maturely and rationally for once in his life. He knew this was a losing battle, even with Indra's successor, Uchiha Sasuke's help. He also knew that the only way to win this battle was to forcibly seal the goddess back to her realm with the strongest Fuinjutsu technique ever created, and can only be done in collaboration with Sasuke. And there was also another reason: his father entrusted him with his own memories, and with that his will of fire. The Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato, sacrificed his soul to protect his son when Kagaya tried to come at him from behind, resulting in Minato acting quickly by teleporting to his son and push him out of the way, but not before transferring his memories through the Shindenshin no Jutsu, mind transfer technique, a technique he learned from Yamanaka Inoichi. With one last tearful smile, Minato faded away like the Nidame before him. That was where Naruto found himself now, staring up at the Otsutsuki with a hint of hatred in his cerulean eyes. Hearing footsteps from beside him, Naruto smirked. "Took you long enough, Teme." "Shut up, Dobi," Uchiha Sasuke replied with a small smirk. He opened his eyes, revealing a fully matured Sharingan in his right eye and a Rinnegan in his left. "I was just letting you rest. Shouldn't you be thanking me?" Nodding with a slight scoff, Naruto turned his attention towards the demon in front of him. "Let's do this, Sasuke, one last time." And at that moment his entire body was engulfed in a brilliant yellow light. When it died down, Naruto was standing there with his Rikudo Senin Moto, 6 Paths Sage Mode, azure eyes turning bright yellow as he glared at the woman who wanted to kill everyone he held dear. "Are you with me?" Sasuke just smirked. "Do you even have to ask?" he said as he drew his katana, and they began their final assault. In a space of a few seconds, Sasuke had already teleported right beside Kagaya and had his left arm extended in a seal, while Naruto appeared on the left with his right arm extended with the same seal. Both of them had almost touched the woman when suddenly she vanished. Before they even had time to react to her disappearance, she reappeared behind them, palms extended outwards. "Foolish children," the woman muttered before launching her ash-killing bones from her palms, quickly skewering both men on them. "You stood no chance, from the very beginning." And with that final parting, she went on her way to kill off the rest of the surviving shinobi. Naruto couldn't believe it as his body was slowly dissolving into ash. They literally didn't have the time to react, much less defend against her attacks. They were outmaneuvered and outclassed since the start, even with their newfound powers. Tears welled in Naruto's eyes as he cursed silently, cursing himself for being so weak, for being unable to save his friends, for failing his father and mother's wishes. He felt utterly and completely useless. As his body slowly cracked and his vision slowly succumbed to darkness, the last thing he saw was Sasuke, lying next to him in a similar state, mouthing, "Thank you, brother," to him, before he closed his eyes and let the darkness take over. Naruto opened his eyes and was expecting to see something akin to flames and eternal suffering, for failing to save his world from the merciless clutches of Kagaya. But instead he found himself in an ethereal, white plane, where unknown to him, time and space were practically non-existent. The sore feeling of his muscles, long hours of non-stop fighting did that to people, were gone as well as any fatigue he had accumulated. In fact, he finally noticed that he wasn't even breathing. Naruto sighed as he found the situation he was in to be increasingly confusing and, as Shikamaru would put it, troublesome. He tested his arms and legs, finding out that he could move them, which relieved him greatly. He didn't like staying in one place for too long. Although his patience tolerance was increased during his years of training, he still had a shorter fuse than most people, and it still irked him greatly if he was kept waiting or couldn't do anything for long periods of time, but he was getting it under control at least. Or at least trying to. Pushing himself up to sit, Naruto looked around him to see if there was anything out of the usual white, which he found none. He took a deep breath, even though he couldn't breathe, and spoke out loud, "Hello? Anyone there?" The silence was his answer, and he asked again, "Hello? Someone? Anyone?" and was greeted again by the deafening silence. Naruto shivered as a cold chill ran through him. If he was to spend the rest of his days here, alone, without friends, family or even enemies, he would have preferred to be thrown into the Shinigami's stomach and forced to fight for all eternity. At least that was better than slowly going insane in this realm. "Ah, you're finally here, my child," a melodious voice said through the deafening silence, and Naruto immediately turned to look at the owner of the new voice, and he couldn't help but be slack-jawed. The owner of the voice was a beautiful woman of average height. Her angelic features and long flowing midnight black hair didn't do her justice, as she was far beyond the epitome of true beauty. Her gray orbs shone with wisdom and compassion, and her flowing blue kimono with a red obi sash was swaying with the breeze. But to Naruto's surprise and slight shock, he couldn't feel any kind wind anywhere. The woman smiled warmly at Naruto. "It's good to see you well, my child of prophecy." Naruto looked at the woman in shock. "Why, you knew I was the child of prophecy?" The woman nodded, the smile never leaving her features. "I was the one who bestowed upon you that title after all, long before you were brought into this world," she explained, and Naruto was floored. Putting all the pieces together in his head, from the prophecy told to him by the elder Toad Sage, along with the notes left by Jiraiya of the Sannin, and the fact that he was currently well and truly dead. Then it all clicked, and his jaw fell again. Slowly pointing a shaky finger at the woman, who still wore that warm smile on her face, Naruto finally found his voice. "Why, you're Kami-sama." He shouted a bit louder than usual. That was the only logical explanation he could come up with in this ridiculous situation, that the woman in front of him was in fact the goddess of the gods. His preposterous theory was proven true when the smile on the woman's face widened just a fraction. "As expected of the champion of my choosing," Kami said, giggling when she saw that Naruto was still staring at her in disbelief. "And there is much more you don't know, so much more, but never mind that. she said as she gracefully sat down, gesturing for the young blonde to do the same, which he did, even if he was still confused. So, tell me my child, what happened? Naruto broke himself out of his stupor, sighed and remained silent. After a moment, he spoke, his voice subdued and sad. Otsutsuki Kagaya ended the world, and I was in the thick of it, and I was powerless to stop it. That's it, plain and simple. It was obvious to everyone that the boy was extremely frustrated with himself for not being able to save his precious people, and he was blaming himself for it. She was just too strong for us. How do you fight someone like that? He said the last part with as much venom as he could. No matter what they did, be it ninjutsu or any other branches of the shinobi arts, the rabbit goddess had a counter for all of them, even their near-instantaneous teleportation techniques. Cammy nodded as she offered him a sad smile of her own. I understand, I'm sorry for all the hardships you had to go through, my child. She said, and Naruto looked into her gray eyes. Otsutsuki Kagaya was once mortal, a kind and gentle soul, scarred by war and violence, but corrupted by power. A power which she couldn't even hope to contain and comprehend. The deity explained as Naruto listened intently, paying full attention. With her newfound power, she ended all conflict by enslaving the world, ruled with fear and intimidation. She was considered an abomination the moment she ingested the Shinju's chakra fruit. Naruto had to agree with that sentiment. That woman's a monster. But that's not what I came here today for, a history lesson. Cammy explained as Naruto looked bewildered. No, because I have need of you once again, my child. Help me save another world from the fate of your own. At her words, Naruto's eyes widened in shock. He spluttered as he tried to speak, but Kami-sama. I couldn't even save my own world and precious people. How am I going to save another world if couldn't even protect my own? He asked, self-doubt gnawing at him from every corner of his consciousness. How could someone be trusted with such an enormous responsibility as they can't even protect their own world from being destroyed? Even if he was the child of prophecy, his failures had to be taken into account, right? At his explanation, Cammy merely shook her head. That's where you are wrong, Naruto-kun. She said, sounding serious, making Naruto look up at her in confusion. Otsutsuki Kagaya has been manipulating your world through her will. You know him as Black Zetsu. Naruto nodded. He recalled seeing the sick plant-like mass of evil that kept spouting about how his Okawa-sama was going to reclaim her chakra, and proceeded to make a mockery out of the Uchiha clan by manipulating them from the very beginning, starting the cycle of hate and suffering, the curse of hatred. He wanted nothing more than to shove a mountain-sized Rasengan into the sick creature for messing with his best friend's life, even before he was born. Through him, he kept tabs on everything and everyone involved in her return to life, and used him to steer the course of history in her favor. Cammy explained without missing a beat. Madara, Obito, the Kyuubi's attack on your village, Sasuke, the Uchiha clan massacre, and the list goes on. Kagaya had been the one to pull the strings in your world, thus, she was able to subdue both you and Sasuke so effortlessly. She had predicted your actions and acted accordingly. Call in precognition if you will. Giving her an almost certain win. No matter how you change the situation, the result would always be the same. Otsutsuki Kagaya winning the 4th Shinobi World War. Naruto gritted his teeth in anger. So that's how the woman killed him. It was such a cheap way to win that Naruto couldn't help but feel even more disgusted by the Otsutsuki woman. How? Naruto muttered angrily, making Cammy look at him sadly. How can someone fight against something like that? It's impossible. No matter how hard he fought to protect his precious people, they would still end up dead and Kagaya still wins. The world seemed to crash down around him as Naruto wallowed deeper and deeper into depression. There is one way. Naruto's head shot up at that, azure eyes brimming with slight hope. There is? There was a way? It all seemed impossible for him to beat something like someone predicting and basically programming your death. But so was standing here talking to a deity. Yes, there is. Kagaya didn't take into account outside interference. Me. Cammy said with a smile, which was slowly mirrored by the young blonde. I have watched countless of my worshippers live and die, prosper and suffer. But you, my child, you have endured the harshest of them all. A kind young man such as yourself doesn't deserve such torment. Cammy explained sadly, tears brimming in her eyes, making Naruto look at her in shock. I'm sorry. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have suffered. but you were my only hope, my champion. Naruto was completely speechless. Here he was, perhaps the only one, to be apologized to, by Cammy herself. He felt honored in some twisted way, but he was too kind a person to receive such endearment, even if it was from a deity that made his early life a living hell. He wasn't that kind of person, he held no grudges. Don't worry Kami-sama, I don't blame you. Naruto said with a bright grin, I don't like holding grudges, even against my enemies, but Kaguya's an exception. He struck a thinking pose and smiled. You could pay me back by helping me kick her ass though. I would appreciate that very much. Like giving me an extra strong bloodline. Oh, like the Mokuton or Maiden, that would be so cool if I did. Cammy giggled as Naruto went on about how he would rub it in Sasuke's face if he did have Mokuton, or any other bloodlines for that matter. He was acting like the Naruto she knew, not the Naruto that the reality of war had produced. Naruto may not even have noticed that fact himself, but he was slowly becoming the embodiment of a battle-hardened shinobi. A cold, calculating and cynical individual, who always watches his back and ties up loose ends. Cammy giggled again. Slow down Naruto-kun, I'm not done yet, she said, and Naruto had the decency to look sheepish as he rubbed the back of his head. I'm going to throw a wrench in Kaguya's plans, I am sending you to a parallel dimension. Naruto could only blink. A what? Cammy giggled again. Don't worry, everything is the same as your reality, only a few bits and pieces and minor details that changed, but nothing too major. She said the last word with a small sense of mischief that Naruto easily picked up, and he narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Noticing the look, Cammy asked with a flustered face, what? He looked at her emotionlessly. I'd recognize that tone anywhere. He deadpanned, a smile slowly making its way onto his face. It's the way I talk when I wanted to prank somebody when I was younger. Lesson 1 in dealing with him. Never prank a professional prankster, or he would be honor-bound to prank you back, even if you were deity. Cammy laughed awkwardly, making Naruto's sweat drop at her behavior. Was it a requirement for extremely powerful people to have their individual quirks? Jiraiya and Kakashi's perverted tendencies immediately came to mind. I guess you're right, she said before continuing, changing topics quickly. The only important thing that's changed is that Kaguya no longer holds an advantage over you. She can't predict what you will do next, but you know all her cards. But be careful, Cammy said seriously. Think about what you're about to change and act accordingly. Don't deviate too much from the original timeline, or Kaguya's will might suspect something, or worse, the entire fabric of reality might collapse in and onto itself. Naruto nodded seriously in response. No way he was screwing up on this once-in-a-lifetime chance to save his friends, so he kept her words to heart. I think that's all really, Cammy said with a nod. Naruto nodded. He bowed deeply. Thank you Kami-sama, for this second chance. Think nothing of it, my champion. She replied with a graceful bow of her own, slightly shocking the blonde man. Think of it as an apology for making your life as difficult and deploring as it was. Hi, he nodded, I won't let you down. I know you won't, Cammy said as a glowing red circle with multiple different ceiling arrays appeared under Naruto. Be strong Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. Find strength and courage along the way. Also, love is always right around the corner and in arm's reach. What? Was his intelligent response. Cammy giggled. You'll find it soon enough. Both wonderful and golden, she cryptically said. Be safe, my child. Now, I think someone's waiting for you on the other side. Before Naruto can ask what she meant by that, he was engulfed by a bright flash of light and his world went dark. It had been a long time since Naruto had been knocked unconscious by something. The last time had been when Sakura punched him through 5 apartment blocks, 10 trees and a few thousand meters away from his apartment to training ground 7. That had been a painful experience, and he had been the dense idiot then, and thinking back on it, he deserved it for his insensitive remark of her small chest and forehead. He would always remember the odd feeling of a growing headache that would last the entire day. Naruto groaned as he forced one of his eyes open, and the first thing he saw was the tree canopy, probably one of Hai no Kuni's, land of fire, many forests, and also the blue sky. Managing to open both of his eyes, he craned his neck to scan his surroundings, and saw that he was in the forest of one of Konoha's training grounds. Taking a closer look at the trees, he noticed them to be younger and healthier in some weird way. He groaned again when he tried to move his arms and legs, all his long hours of fatigue and wear all coming back to him at once. Deciding to check his chakra reserves, he found out that they were almost empty, much to his shock. His massive reserves of chakra, monstrously so even, depleted to just a small trickle, just enough for him to stay alive. Naruto then sensed something strange. He felt power coming from multiple points of his body, almost like small storage devices. Gathering enough strength to raise one of his arms, he finally noticed the source of the energy signatures, chakra's storage seals. He grinned weakly as he can only guess one person who could give it to him. "Thank you, Kami-sama." Without wasting any more time, Naruto activated all of them with a slight flare of his chakra. There were 10 seals in total, and soon he felt his strength and chakra coming back to him, filling up his reserves gradually, and he felt much better. "Ouch," Naruto muttered as he forced himself to sit up, and he started to chuckle weakly. "So this is what coming back to life feels like. Honestly, it sucks." The blonde looked down and saw that he was no longer in his standard choice of clothing anymore. He was currently wearing a white t-shirt with a red whirlpool design on the back, a pair of brown khaki pants held together by an orange belt, and a pair of clean open-toed blue sandals. The change in clothing didn't startle the young time and dimension traveler that much, but it was the other change that shocked him. Quickly staggering to his feet, Naruto stretched out his sense. He was a damn good sensor when he wanted to be. He charted out a mental map of his surroundings, and smiled in relief when he sensed a small creek nearby. "So thirsty," the young man said, and he made his way towards the general direction of the creek, and sure enough, it was there. The sounds of running fresh water were music to his ears. Kneeling in front of it, Naruto moaned in relief as the cool water made its way down his dry throat. He can never forget the particular sweet taste of Hai no Kuni's fresh river water, which he missed dearly during the war, where fresh water was scarce and the land barren due to constant fighting. He proceeded to splash his face with water to refresh and was in the process of wiping it dry when he looked down at the water. What the hell?" the young blonde muttered, eyes wide in shock. Staring back at him was his reflection, but it was not the face he was expecting to see. The Naruto who was staring back at him was very much younger than he was expecting, 13 years old if he had to hazard a guess. But unlike when he was at that age, he looked more mature and his features were more pronounced. There was no baby fat left on his face, and most importantly, his trademark whisker-like birthmarks were gone, making him look like his father's clone. He noticed that he was fairly tall, a reasonable 5'5", much taller than his midget height of 4'9" when he was 13 back then. Naruto sighed as he started to chuckle. Time travel and dimension travel weren't his forte, but after melding with his father's memories, he better understood the basics of space-time and was obliged to believe that this was all true, no matter how unbelievable it was. This was certainly unexpected. Maybe this was what Kami wanted, sending him back in time to save the future. And for that second chance, he wouldn't trade it for anything. Naruto chuckled. "Well, I can't say I'm not happy about this." "How can you not be?" a voice said inside his head that made Naruto pause, and a small, tearful smile came on his face. "One would think that being alive was a happy occasion, kid." Naruto shook his head slightly as he laughed at that. He'd recognize that voice anywhere. It belonged to his lifelong companion, partner and surrogate big brother, Kurama, the Kyuubi no Kitsune. He could still remember the day when the Biju swore on his life that he would protect Naruto and be with him always, as a brother and partner. Centering in on himself, Naruto was soon standing in the familiar surroundings of his mindscape, which was still a very damp sewer. He definitely needed to fix that sometime in the future. It's beyond degrading for one such as the Kyuubi no Kitsune to be living in such conditions. Naruto smiled. "It's great to see you, Kurama." The great fox nodded with a toothy grin, Fox's sharp canines widening as he did. "Good to be back, kid. How are you feeling?" Naruto groaned, but grinned nonetheless. "Like I've been through hell and back," and then challenged Rock Lee to a spar while he's drunk. He could still remember that day when someone accidentally spiked Lee's food with sake, and Naruto had to resort to using his Senin Modo, Sage Mode, to calm him down, destroying a few housing complexes and a training ground in the process. After that day, no one dared to let Lee near a sake bottle ever again. Kurama's howling laughter was his reply. "Huh, I still remember that day," he chortled, broken arm or two and a couple of ribs if I remembered correctly. Had to heal your sorry ass from the ground up. Naruto grimaced as he remembered the beating he took. Yeah, that was embarrassing. After sobering, Kurama became serious. Joking aside, what are you going to do now? From what I can tell, you're near Konoha in one of the training grounds. Coming out of his mindscape and into the real world, Naruto nodded as he started to walk in the direction of the village. I don't know Kurama, I really don't know. How can I explain it to them when I see them? He admitted. He cleared his throat and in an overly comical voice, continued. Hi, I'm from another dimension, and sort of time-traveled and was sent here by Kami to save the future? He shook his head at that. They'd label me as a lunatic and I'll be sent to the loony bin faster than one could say Rasengan. Well, at least your sense of humor is intact, Kurama replied, amusement tinging his tone. Naruto gave him a mental equivalent of sticking his tongue out at the beast. Kurama sighed from where he was. Kit, it's a lot more complicated than that. What do you mean? The Biju cleared his throat before speaking. I don't know how to explain this, but it seems a part of my chakra is somewhere in the village. Naruto visibly looked shocked as he staggered, not believing what he was hearing. But it isn't like the feeling of my yin and yang chakras where we split into two entities. Kurama continued, no, this feeling's different. Before coming here, I was suddenly bombarded with images of my early days, you know, all angry and hate and malice, the whole 9 yards. I managed to overpower it and I felt whole, for lack of a better term, again. Now, I feel like my old self again, and it feels like I'm in two places at once. Naruto listened intently as he tried to let the information sink in. The only conclusion I can give is this. There is another you in the village. Arg, that's just great. Naruto cried out in frustration as his suspicions were right on the dot. Kami-sama, I don't know where you are, but I'm so going to prank you for this mess, he shouted up to the heavens. Now he finally knew what she meant by small changes. There were 2 of him in the world. He slumped forward as he let that information sink in. Can this get any worse? Well, there is some good news, Kurama said, gaining his container's attention, if I'm reading the chakra signatures right. A chuckle escaped from the fox's snout, making Naruto slightly suspicious and wary. He's a she. What? Naruto's shout echoed throughout the forest, causing the birds to fly away in fright as the trees ruffled from the force of the shout. You mean that other me is a girl? Naruto felt Kurama mentally nod. I'm positive, no questions about it, but that means. Naruto started as a small, hopeful smile formed on his lips. She's my sister? As long as he could remember, he always craved for a family he could call his own, like how the Sandaime became his surrogate grandfather and Jiraiya his godfather. And now Kurama, the greatest of the Biju, was now his surrogate brother. But having blood relative meant so much more than that. It meant that he was having a real family, and he was certain his counterpart felt the same way too. In a way, yes kid, she's your sister. Kurama explained with a wistful sigh. Now you have a real family again, that means you don't need me anymore. Hey, well, it was fun while it lasted. In an instant, Naruto was in his mindscape and he tackled the great fox in a hug, but his enormous size meant that Naruto was only able to hug one of his giant paws, but it was still the same to him. Don't you ever say that. You're family now, and nothing's going to change that. Kurama looked down at Naruto, seeing the tears welling up in the young blonde's eyes, and he immediately felt guilty. Please Kurama, don't say anything like that anymore. I lost my friends once, I don't want to go through that pain again. Kurama sighed as he nodded. I'm sorry Naruto, he replied, I promise I won't leave you ever again. Naruto grinned as he wiped away his tears with the cuff of his arms. You know you've mellowed out a lot more since becoming my brother. Don't get too comfortable Gaki, I'm not that mellow yet. Kurama stated with a barking laugh, and Naruto just smiled, same old Kurama. Now, you better get going kid. I think there's someone coming. And with that, Naruto was pulled out of his mindscape and into the real world. He noticed that he had been walking for a long time while talking to Kurama, as he was nearing the edge of the forest, and soon was in a clearing of some sorts. A strong sense of nostalgia hit him as he gazed at the training grounds. In all his life, Naruto had only acquainted himself with only 3 training grounds of Konoha, and these were the places he always trained in. The first was Training Ground 7, the meeting place of Team 7. The second was the unforgettable Training Ground 44, or, affectionately, known to the locals, Mitarashi Anko comes to mind, as the Forest of Death. And the last one was a bit more personal to the blonde, as it was at this training ground that he had found respite from the glares, jeers and mental abuse from the villagers when he was younger, especially on his birthdays when the abuse was at its worst. It was the Hokage's private training ground 3. He had received permission from the then ruling Sandaime Hokage to use this place as his safe haven from the villagers, as well as a temporary home, as his apartment would most likely be thrashed in the villagers' celebration of the defeat of Kurama at the hands of his father. Looking around the clearing, Naruto smiled as he breathed in the spring air whilst taking in his surroundings. It was slightly smaller than the generic training grounds around Konoha, and it sported a standard ring of Konoha's famous forests around the clearing, as well as a pristine lake which formed from a river further away to train water release techniques in. There was also a waterfall at the source of the river flow, which further enhances nature's beauty in Naruto's eyes. A sudden sound of footsteps made Naruto tense up as he pulled out a kunai from his pants pocket, where only a few kunai and shuriken were stored. He made a mental note to himself to stock up on basic supplies and shop for new clothing. The t-shirt and khaki pants weren't going to cut it. Years of battle experience and the constant warfare made him act on reflex as he readied for whoever's coming out of the forest. He unconsciously channeled chakra into his kunai, and had unknowingly formed a seal of some sort on the hilt of the kunai. Naruto expected to see an ugly white Zetsu or an enemy missing nin jumping out of the forest to attack him, but instead he was greeted by the sight of a cute young girl with the same shade of golden blonde hair as his own. "Finally, I'm a kunoichi now," the young girl said enthusiastically. "Now I'm going to show the world that I can be the Hokage, even if I am a girl." Databane. Naruto dropped his kunai in shock. The newcomer was a girl of average height and of same age as him. Her long flowing golden blonde hair was tied into twin pigtails by 2 black ribbons, and she had purple eyes that shone with innocence and determination. Refocusing his vision, he took notice of the girl's features, and he had to admit she was one of the most beautiful girls he had ever seen in his life, and the whisker-like birthmarks which at one time they both shared made her look exotic and cute. Her face was quite angelic, and the outfit she wore was a form-fitting black and orange t-shirt with whirlpool designs and knee-length pants which expressed her great figure, which was well developed for her age. And judging by her abnormally large chakra reserves, this was his counterpart. He unconsciously gulped, blatantly ignoring the howling laughter in his head. His very cute counterpart. The girl finally took notice that she was not alone and turned to face him, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Huh? Who are you and why are you doing here?" It was already embarrassing enough for her to shout out her verbal tic, but to let someone else hear it was even more so. Naruto coughed a bit before speaking. "I'm new to this village, I just came here today." He lied smoothly. He had already thought of a backstory on the fly while walking to the village. This was a good time as any to use it. "I stumbled upon this training ground while walking around the village, but I didn't know this was a shinobi-only area. Sorry." The girl's eyes narrowed in suspicion, and Naruto tensed ever so slightly. That was the look his mother Uzumaki Kushina would give when she was serious or that she was suspicious about something. Naruto mentally sweated at the intense stare the girl had while at the same time wondering just how different she was at that age compared to himself when he was the same age. "This is one of the Hokage's private training grounds," the girl said. "You shouldn't have been able to sneak in without the Anbu apprehending you." Naruto sighed in defeat. She was right, as most normal civilians would have been apprehended by the Anbu by now. He had no choice but to be truthful with her now. "Sorry about that," Naruto said with a bow. "I meant no disrespect, as I lied to you from the start." He became serious as his intense azure orbs locked onto the girl's purple ones. "But I assure you, I mean no harm to you or the village. This I can promise you." "How can I be sure of that?" she asked again. Her tone held hostility in it, and he noticed she was fingering her weapons pouch. "For all I know, you could be a foreign shinobi sent here to kill me or the Hokage or spy on the village." Naruto smiled a little when she said that, silently praising her again for her caution. "How do you know I'm a shinobi?" The girl pointed at the fallen kunai. "That kunai was my clue, and I'm an accomplished sensor, and I sense that your chakra coils are highly developed, meaning you had shinobi training," she explained casually. Naruto then realized something. She was far more intelligent and mature than he ever was at her age. He was currently a 17-year-old with a mentality of a 30-year-old in the body of a 13-year-old, so he could explain his ways. But the girl in front of him, she didn't take things at face value. She questioned everything he had said. She was still very cautious around him, and she was even more skeptical about his excuses. In short, she was a true kunoichi. That thought alone made Naruto very proud of his counterpart. Very perceptive, truly one worthy of her Hitai 8. He complimented, making the girl's eyes widen in surprise. Yes, it's true, but I assure you, he knelt down and picked up the kunai, making the girl tense up. I mean no harm. After all, my family's in this village, so I couldn't and wouldn't do anything to jeopardize its safety, he said with conviction. He held the kunai to his palm, and if it calms your thoughts, he sliced it open, letting the blood drip from his palm and onto the ground. I swear, on my blood and my life, that I would never bring harm to your village. Already, Kurama was already healing him up as the cut was all but gone in a few moments. The girl stared at the boy in shock. Okay, I'm convinced. Her posture relaxed as she moved her hand away from her weapon's pouch. What are you really here for, Stranger-kun? She asked with a cute smile. Naruto smiled back. I wanted to meet the Hokage, if it's alright with you. The girl nodded, suddenly serious again. Alright, but no funny business or the Jonins will have your head. Noted, Naruto replied as he extended a hand. Name's Naruto, just Naruto. After some careful consideration with Kurama, he decided to not use his first name just yet, not after he had cleared it up with the Sandame. The girl looked stunned for a moment, spluttering slightly before composing herself and shook the extended hand. Uzumaki Naruto, genin of Konohagakure, and future and first female Hokage, she said with a smile. Naruto's eyes widened a bit in shock. Wow, was all he said, which basically summed up all his thoughts. Wow is right, Naruto stated with a giggle. Come on, I'll take you to the Hokage mansion. Naruto just nodded as he followed the eager girl. Alright then, lead the way. So, began Naruto as she walked backwards while facing Naruto. Where exactly are you from, Naruto-san? Following at a slightly sedate pace, Naruto just shrugged. I've told you, I'll explain everything once we meet Hokage-sama. It's not something I can freely tell to anyone. I'm sorry. Naruto pouted, earning a chuckle from the male blonde. Fine, but you owe me. Naruto chuckled. Hi. The two of them were currently walking through the village of Konoha towards the Hokage mansion, which was located just under the Hokage monument at the back of the village. Naruto was hit yet again by a sense of nostalgia as he gazed upon the great stone faces of the previous Hokages, elegantly carved into the mountain. He maintained his gaze at the face furthest to the right, where Namikaze Minato's monument stood. He silently prayed for his father and mother, and renewed his vow to defeat Kaguya once and for all. It was about noon, and the village was as lively as Naruto remembered, and it made him quite happy. Hawkers and shopkeepers were busy selling their goods, children were all playing tag and ninja, while the adults were milling about their daily routines. The peaceful and lively atmosphere reminded Naruto about why Konoha shinobi fight in the first place. And here was the reason that he would do anything to protect them, if he can. Don't worry kid, Kurama said from within him. You'll definitely save them this time, you have me remember? Thanks for the vote of confidence Yukaki Kitsune. Naruto mentally replied with a smile, earning a howl of laughter from his tenant. Besides, you also have your counterpart as well, and by Kami, she's one pretty little lady. Kurama commented with a wolfish whistle. She's smart, mature and very much kunoichi material. Definitely unlike you when you were her age. Maybe you should go for her kit. She's definitely a good mating material. Naruto stumbled slightly, shocked out of his wits. He waved off Naruto's concerns as he continued walking as if nothing happened. Although many wouldn't notice it, Naruto actually had a small blush on his face as he mentally frowned. Shut up, Kurama, just stop it, she's my sister damn it. To his chagrin, Kurama only laughed louder. As Naruto looked around while trying to fight down his blush and tune out the slightly perverted Biju's comments, he noticed that the villagers who saw Naruto weren't glaring at her or ignoring her as he would normally expect. In fact, they were actually greeting and waving at her, and the bubbly girl just waved back with a huge smile. That was when Naruto realized one of the major deviations of this dimension with his own. Uzumaki Naruto was already acknowledged by the village much earlier than Naruto's. The very thing he fought for all his life, and he only got the recognition when he saved the village from Nagato's 6 paths of pain, 16 years later. Naruto then felt a sense of envy well up inside him at his counterpart's treatment. He knew it was wrong to feel that way, but that particular emotion came up unannounced. How he wished the villagers back in his time would acknowledge him this early in his life, that he wouldn't have to put up with the constant glares and harsh treatment from the villagers. He wouldn't have been alone, unwanted. Suddenly, a wave of soothing energy washed over him, and he noticed that Kurama was flooding his chakra coils with the calming effects of his yang chakra, and Naruto sighed in content. Thanks Kurama, I needed that. Don't mention it, and I think your crush is worried about you Tilda, Kurama sang out at the end, making Naruto frown mentally. I don't have a... He never finished the mental statement, because at that moment, his vision was blocked out by the cute face of Naruto, her face showing concern for the blonde male. He also noticed the close proximity between their faces, and he immediately blushed. Damn these teenaged hormones. It also didn't help when his tenant was teasing him all the while. Naruto-san, are you alright? Naruto asked with concern. Your face looked sad all of a sudden. Naruto shook his head and sighed as he smiled sadly at her. You noticed, huh? He chuckled dryly. The way he chuckled reminded Naruto of someone truly sad and lonely, like how she had been when she was younger, and couldn't help but find it similar. I'm an orphan, you know. My parents died protecting my home village from a walking natural disaster. Ignoring the indignant snort from a certain fox, he continued, ever since then, the villagers had always hated it, as they lost loved ones during the disaster, and they needed a scapegoat to vent out their sadness and anger. They found it in me. Naruto's eyes widened in shock as she immediately related the male blonde's plight with her own, a couple of years ago. The villagers always hated me, glared at me, ignored me, even going so far as overcharging spoiled goods and chasing me out of the village on my birthdays, as it's the same date as when the natural disaster struck. He continued, every day I tried to get them to acknowledge me for me, not for the things that I couldn't possibly control. I played pranks on the villagers just to get their attention. Even while negative, it was far better than the glares and them pretending that I didn't exist in their minds. The whole backstory of his was him thinking on the fly, but the emotions in them were real and genuine. He only twisted the tale of his mom and dad's to better suit his own version, but the emotions in them held true. Naruto didn't even know he was crying until something wet slid down his face, and he reached up to wipe them away. He honestly couldn't believe how a story he made up on the fly could get him to cry, but he got the message across at least. He looked up to see that Naruto had stopped walking, and was crying tears of her own. He smiled a little in happiness. Someone was crying for him, even if it was for his plight. That was new for him. I am sorry, she started, voice uneven and watery due to the crying. I shouldn't have brought it up. I'm sorry. Naruto shook his head with a kind smile. Don't worry. It's not your fault. He soothed, gesturing to the scene around him. The lively atmosphere here reminded me of what I could have had, and what I can have. But still, Naruto sniffed, I was the one who opened old wounds. Please forgive my insensitivity. She bowed low, tears still falling from her eyes. She felt horrible at opening a wound that couldn't easily be healed. She knew that better than anyone. She felt so useless and insensitive at her actions, and was hoping the blonde boy could forgive her. She was horribly snapped out of her pessimistic thoughts when she was embraced in a hug, from Naruto no less. Don't blame yourself. You crying for me means that you do care about other people, and I'm grateful for it, Naruto said, as he hugged the girl tighter, causing her to blush slightly. Thank you for your concern. It's refreshing really, since not many people showed me kindness out of the goodness of their hearts. He said the last part with as much sarcasm as possible, making the girl in his arms giggle. Naruto pulled away from the hug, blush still on her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome, Naruto said, before he smirked, you know. I kind of like your hugs, it's all warm and cuddly, like hugging a teddy bear. Naruto's blush flared as she pouted indignantly at the accusation, I am not a teddy bear. I'm a kunoichi. Naruto laughed harder as she continued to pout, I know, I'm just teasing you. Now shall we get going? Finally having her blush under control, she nodded and smiled warmly. Sure, let's go, she said, and they both continued on their way towards the Hokage mansion, with Naruto greeting the villagers and shinobi alike along the way, while Naruto just smiled warmly at his counterpart. Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, was not having a good day. First, last night he found out one of the Academy Chunin instructors, a man named Toji Mizuki, had deliberately sabotaged the Genin exams of one of the top students of the gradating year out of spite for the Kyuubi, and then tricked the said Academy student into stealing the scroll of forbidden seals which was kept under heavy guard by the Anbu and the Hokage in the safest vault in the Hokage mansion, which the student did successfully and managed to get away with it. The elderly Hokage was currently sitting behind his desk, puffing on his stovepipe while reminiscing about last night's events. He lowered his Hokage's hat in embarrassment when he thought back on the way one Uzumaki Naruto did to get the scroll from him, even though she was caught red-handed by him during the act. Hiruzen lowered his hat further in shame. To think, me of all people, the Kami no Shinobi, god of shinobi, would be defeated by such an absurd jutsu. He sighed as he thought about the infamous Oroku no Jutsu, sexy jutsu, used by the girl, which caused him to pass out from blood loss. If word got out about this, my reputation in the villages would be inconceivably ruined. I think I might have to label that jutsu a kinjutsu, just in case. He was snapped out of his reverie when the double burgundy doors into his office opened to reveal a middle-aged woman in her 30s with brown hair and dark eyes walk in. She bowed respectfully. Hokage-sama. Hiruzen nodded with a grandfatherly smile. Ah yes, Hikari-chan. What do I owe the pleasure of this meeting? The newly named Hikari just rolled her eyes at her leader's antics as Hiruzen chuckled. Genin Uzumaki Naruto would like to speak with you. I believe she is bringing along a guest. The Hokage raised a surprised eyebrow at that information. Really now? He asked, wondering who might the guest be. By all means, send them in. Hi Hokage-sama. And Hikari left, and soon a familiar figure emerged from the doorway, which immediately ran squealing towards him like a cannonball. No one had yet noticed a second figure that silently slipped through the door, and quietly pushed it closed. Gigi. The blonde bundle squealed like the innocent little girl she was supposed to be, and Hiruzen couldn't help but laugh heartily. Over the years he had come to love the girl as one of his own, and he was overjoyed indeed when the villagers finally decided to let go of their old hatreds and welcome her with opened arms, despite the beast within her. Why, hello there Naruto-chan. The Hokage said happily, how are you today? Naruto, who was still sitting on the elder man's lap, smiled brightly up at her surrogate grandfather. I'm fine Gigi. I'm finally getting my shinobi license today. Hiruzen laughed again. Good for you Naruto-chan. You're one step closer to achieving your dream. Naruto giggled as she pumped her fists. Of course I am. Databane. She immediately covered her mouth in embarrassment as a blush formed on her face, whilst Hiruzen chuckled. It was at that moment he took notice of a second presence in the room, and the wizened Hokage turned his attention towards the other occupant of the room. Before he could even speak, his jaw dropped slightly at the sight of the young man in front of him, his stovepipe dropping on the floor as he did. Naruto tilted her head in confusion at the Hokage's actions, and she turned to look at her new friend for answers, who just stood there with a kind smile as he scratched the back of his head. Minato? Hiruzen couldn't believe it. He swore that the boy in front of him was an exact replica of his predecessor when he was younger, and he couldn't help but raise his hopes slightly at the thought of him being alive again. To his slight dismay, the blond boy merely shook his head with a warm smile. No, I am not the Yondaime Hokage. Seeing where the conversation was going, the Sandaime turned to his surrogate granddaughter, Naruto-chan, you better go get your license made. Your friend and I are going to have a little chat. Naruto stared at him confused as her mind was putting together the pieces of Naruto's appearance to that of the Yondaime Hokage, her idol. She nodded nonetheless as she made her way out the room, her mind pondering the possibility of Naruto being the Yondaime's son or relative. Sparing one last worried glance at her new friend, who just gave her a reassuring smile, she made her way to the doors and started her journey to the roof, where the licenses were being made. In the back of her mind though, she silently hoped that Naruto somehow, by some miracle, would be her long-lost relative, as judging by their facial structures and blonde hair they were both in some ways similar. But she knew it was a fleeting pipe dream, but it provided some measure of comfort to the girl at least. As soon as the doors closed, Hiruzen immediately stood up. Anbu, leave us. Silently, 4 invisible Anbu vanished from the room, and Hiruzen put up a privacy seal around the room. Once done, he stared down at the blonde boy in front of him, his aura and chakra flaring as killing intent filled the room. Depending on how you answer my questions, I will decide whether you live or die, is that understood? To his surprise, the blonde didn't even flinch when the boy nodded back, expression serious. First of all, who are you? Naruto stared back at him with equal intensity. Depends on who's asking. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes as his killing intent flared to new heights. The one asking is a man who can wipe you off the face of the earth if you answer wrongly or snidely. He clarified as he sat down, now, I'll ask again, who are you? Naruto sighed as he smiled a little as his respect for the Sandaime went up a notch. No wonder he was called the Kami no Shinobi. His aura and killing intent would floor even experienced Jonin and knock out inexperienced Chunin and Genin. But, Naruto reminded himself, he was far from an average shinobi. Noticing the smile, Hiruzen frowned as he readied for anything. Why are you smiling? Naruto chuckled. Very impressive Gigi, he said, making Hiruzen even angrier than before the blonde's next cheerful words shocked him. You haven't changed a bit. Hiruzen was stunned. No one should have been able to withstand that much killing intent and not faint or be floored by it, much less a 13-year-old boy. To be able to withstand that kind of power and still be able to remain cheerful and outright laugh, the boy's mental prowess must be astonishing. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes in confusion. What are you talking about? I've never met you before, much less talked to you. No, Naruto conceded, nodding as he did. Not you specifically, but by another version of you in an alternate reality, dimension, until I was 13. Stop spewing such nonsense. Hiruzen shouted, slamming his hands on his desk, cracking it. How can anyone possibly believe that you came from another dimension, reality? Even if it was true, then what proof do you have? He had heard a lot of crazy things in his long life, but this one took the cake. Another dimension? And from what he heard from the boy, who couldn't be more than 13, time travel. This situation was getting really troublesome, really fast. Elsewhere, a certain pineapple-haired man sneezed. To his unending surprise, the blonde just shook his head. I don't just have proof, I have many proofs. The boy then pulled out the kunai he had used earlier in the training grounds, and placed it on the Hokage's desk. After the little meet-up with Naruto back at the field, Naruto noticed some residue chakra on the hilt of the blade, and when he examined it he found a seal of some sort engraved on it with chakra. He also noticed when he stretched out his senses, this seal appeared to his senses as some sort of tear in the fabric of space-time in which he can open at a whim, and when he tried opening it when no one's looking, including Naruto, he had appeared at where the kunai and the seal had been almost instantly. After consulting with Kurama and a bit of probing through his father's memories, they concluded that since his father's memories, including muscle memory, had been assimilated by him, it can only mean one thing. Naruto had unknowingly mastered the infamous Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique. It irked him at first for mastering such a powerful technique through such a cheap way as a memory transfer. He was encouraged by Kurama to further improve upon it and find more ways to apply it on the battlefield, which got his hopes up on not copying his father's jutsu without hard work. Hiruzen looked at the ordinarily looking kunai and raised an eyebrow. What does this have to do with you coming from another dimension? Naruto shook his head in amusement. Trying holding it and see what you can find, he offered, while discreetly forming another Hiraishin jutsu shiki through the soles of his feet. This was one way he tried to improve upon the Hiraishin, by placing jutsu shikis through his feet. It requires near-perfect chakra control and it was impractical with his current mastery to be used effectively during battle, but perfect for a demonstration of his abilities. The elderly Hokage tried to sense any ill intent coming from the blonde. When finding none, he picked up the kunai and started to examine it. While to any normal observer, it would appear as any other regular kunai, but Hiruzen wasn't called the professor for nothing, as he sensed a trickle of chakra in the hilt of the blade, and when he examined it, he noticed a seal engraved on it. Upon closer inspection, Hiruzen's eyes widened in shock and recognition and was about to say something when he felt a shift in the air in front of him. His eyes caught sight of a flash of yellow, and then a split second later the kunai in his hands was gone. He looked up to see Naruto standing there, casually spinning the kunai with his fingers through the ring at the hilt. a smile on his face. The old leader didn't even have the chance to react. Hiruzen staggered back in his seat slightly as he took in a shaky breath, not believing what he was seeing. That was he trailed off at the end, and he saw Naruto nod in affirmation. You thought right, Gigi, that was the Yondaime's prized jutsu, the Hiraishin. Naruto said, and he put away the kunai into his pocket. I guess that answers your questions about my abilities? Hiruzen just nodded numbly, eyes and mind still not comprehending the things they had seen and processed. But no matter how he saw it, it will always be the same. The boy, a young 13-year-old, had just performed an S-rank ninjutsu known to many and used only by one. But still, even if the boy proved that he could perform a jutsu that could destroy an entire army in under a minute, that still didn't automatically mean that he was from another dimension. The old cage needed more concrete proof than that, even though it was still very impressive. Hiruzen composed himself from the shock of seeing a legendary jutsu performed by a young boy. While that was very impressive indeed, my young friend, that still doesn't automatically prove you're from another dimension. He explained skeptically. Forgive me for being skeptical, but I need more concrete proof than the Hiraishin to even begin to consider what you're telling me. Naruto nodded in understanding. I figured you would say that, that's why I brought a second proof, my heritage. He said, becoming serious, my birth name is Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. The Hokage's eyes widened even further after that declaration, and his mind was going into shock. But in order to protect me from my father's enemies, my worldview, the Sandaime Hokage, placed my name as Uzumaki Naruto, taking my mother's maiden name. I am also the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the strongest of the Biju. You also passed a law that states that whoever brought up the Kyuubi incident and that the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi was me, you'll have them executed without trial for high treason. Hiruzen slumped further in his seat, mind racing furiously as the facts listed by the boy was irrefutable. And judging by your reaction, Naruto continued, smiling slightly, I'm guessing Naruko-chan was treated the same way. But from what I saw, she's living a happy life. Hiruzen just nodded as a small smile graced his old features. Yes, she is, he said happily. The villagers have finally let go of their old hatreds and welcomed her with open arms. That was not the case several years ago when animosity towards the Kyuubi was still high. The old man chuckled. It was because of her determination and goodwill to others that many had finally begun to see her as a kind, innocent girl who wants nothing more than your acknowledgement and friendship. Naruto briefly wondered if that could happen to him when he was younger, but he just shrugged it off. No point living in the past. Hiruzen sighed, rubbing his temples as he did. I think I don't need any more proof than that. Naruto nodded. If you want, I can get a blood test from the hospital if you still want confirmation. No need, but it'll help with official documentation. Hiruzen replied, a thoughtful look on his wizened features. From what I can tell, the Hiraishin can only be used by Minato alone or one of his blood relatives, so that was all the proof I need. He stated, and he physically relaxed, drained physically and mentally from the events during the past few minutes. I'm getting too old for this shit. Well, I'll be damned, Naruto said with a laugh. Sarutobi Hiruzen finally admitted he's old. Hiruzen, despite the weariness, laughed along, albeit wearily. You're just like Naruko-chan, always the troublemaker. He commented, earning him a cheeky grin from the blonde, which slowly turned into a sad smile. Naruto? Suddenly, he was tackled by the young boy in a hug, and the old cage slowly hugged him back. Despite meeting with Naruto only a few minutes ago, he already felt a sense of familiarity with the blonde, like how he felt with Naruto. Hiruzen smiled sadly as he felt the young boy tremble and shake in his hold, holding the old man in a strong grip, as if the boy was afraid he would disappear if he did. Naruto sniffed as tears fell from his eyes. This may sound weird since you've only just met me a few minutes ago, he said, voice cracking from the emotion. But I've missed you terribly, Gigi. Hiruzen just smiled sadly, I know. Despite not knowing his counterpart, the Sandaime could safely assume that the other him and Naruto had grown very close, much like how Hiruzen himself and Naruto were now. Even now, he already considered the boy as one of his own grandchildren, even if he had known him for only a few minutes. A sudden thought broke Hiruzen out of his stupor as he spoke, Naruto. The boy pulled back from the hug. What do you mean by, until you were 13? Did something happen to me after you were 13? It was a valid question, because as far as he knew, Naruto was going 13 this year and he himself was still quite spry for a man in his late 60s. What had happened, he couldn't help but wonder. At his question, Naruto's mood became sorrowful and sad, and it broke the old Kage's heart. That was all the confirmation he needed. No. He had seen that kind of look far too many times for his liking after the Second and Third Shinobi World Wars. I see, Hiruzen said, knowing full well what that expression meant. Who did it? Naruto grimaced slightly. What do you mean? Hiruzen gripped Naruto's shoulders tightly, forcing the boy to look up at him. Who killed me, Naruto-kun? Naruto paused as he contemplated for a second. If he told the Sandaime now about the events of the future, he could possibly tip off Black Zetsu and lose his ace against Kaguya. But if he told only a select few of his plans, then it would be easier to control that information. But it would have to be a person that has his absolute trust, and the Sandaime was one of those people. Alright Gigi, Naruto started, voice deadly serious, what I'm about to tell you must never leave this room. Period. At this, Hiruzen's eyes widened before nodding seriously. This information could jeopardize the future of the elemental nations, and can only be told to a select few. Do you understand, Gigi? Hiruzen smiled. Of course Naruto-kun. Well, if you break our pact I could just kill you. Naruto joked. You really believe that merely with the Hiruishin, you could take me on and kill me? Hiruzen joked back with a challenging grin, which was mirrored by the young blonde moments later. You underestimate me Gigi, Naruto retorted, crossing his arms in front of his chest with a smirk. I didn't become a shinobi without my particular set of skills, you know. Hiruzen chuckled as he leaned forward. And what would that be? In truth, he was curious about the blonde boy's abilities, as the Hiruishin alone already made him at low Jonin level. A true prodigy indeed. Naruto casually listed off his skills with his fingers. 1. I'm a sage, I can utilize natural energy. 2. I have full cooperation of my tenant, who gives me a tremendous boost in my abilities. 3. I know a few dozen C rank and B rank jutsus, offense and defense, even though I rarely use them, and some A rank jutsus as well. 4. I'm immune to genjutsu thanks to my tenant, he said, grinning cheekily as he finished with, and 5. I'm just plain awesome. Throughout the explanation, Hiruzen's jaw dropped gradually as each of the skills was listed, and Naruto couldn't help but chuckle. Of course, there was also the Rikudo Senin Moto, but he needn't mention that. Hiruzen shook his head in amusement and awe. With those skills alone, you're basically a Kage-level shinobi in your own right. He exclaimed, you're still a Jinchuriki? Naruto nodded as he channeled chakra to his stomach, revealing the Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigram seal. Hiruzen chuckled as he leaned back in his seat. I think I may just retire and give you my hat, he said with a laugh, but that last point I beg to differ. Naruto-chan claims that she's more awesome than anyone else. Naruto smirked. Wanna bet? Hiruzen paled. Oh, hell no. If your luck is anything like Naruto's, I'll be broke by the end of the day. Naruto laughed out loud at that. You know it. After that, Naruto proceeded to explain his life and the major events that took place in extreme detail, right up until the Fourth Shinobi World War. After a lengthy, 20-minute discussion, Naruto finally sat back down and took a deep gulp of water to soothe his aching throat. The old Kage just sat behind his desk, letting the information sink in and be processed, and his expression was blank and unreadable. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Hiruzen finally spoke up, breaking it. So, the progenitor of Chakra herself was responsible. The powerful Kage murmured, his expression grim. Never in my long years as a shinobi have I heard such a ridiculous story, but coming from you, I would very much believe it like I was actually there. The man chuckled as he rubbed his temples. This is a lot to take in. Who knew that world's coming to an end in just a few years? I know, Gigi. Take your time, Naruto said with a sad smile. After all, it's not every day you were told about your death at the hands of your former student and the end of the world by a mere teenager. Promise you won't do anything rash, at least consult with me first. Hiruzen nodded as he stood up and gazed down at his beloved village. There, he saw citizens and shinobi milling about their daily lives. To think that this peaceful atmosphere would be shattered in the next few years was unimaginable. But, Hiruzen believed Naruto's story. He had seen the haunted look in the boy's cerulean orbs when he had elaborated on the war, a sight which very nearly broke the old man's heart. No boy as young as Naruto should possess that kind of look, the look of a battle-weary soldier who had seen too much. The war was coming. They needed to prepare. I promise Naruto-kun, I won't do anything without consulting you first. The man said as he turned to face the young blonde. Actually, I have a favor to ask of you. What is it? Naruto asked eagerly. Back in his time, the only times the Hokage asks a favor of him was always the most rewarding of them all. Like free ramen or a field trip with the Hokage to the monument to watch the sunset. It was both memorable and delighting, and Naruto missed those times with his first precious person. Hiruzen walked to his desk and opened a drawer, and he fished out some papers and began to write something down. After finishing, he handed them to Naruto. Give this to one of the academy instructors. He instructed, as Naruto took the paper from his hand. They'll give you a test and proceed to make you a genin. And when that's done, one of these days, come find me where we can test your true skills, the old man explained, and Naruto nodded with a smile. He was getting his rank back. He may be still a genin when he left his old world. It still stung his pride for being the only one along with Sasuke out of the Konoha 12 to still remain as a genin for so long. And also, this. The Hokage handed a second paper to him, and the young blonde's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when he read them. These were Konoha's official adoption papers, and it listed him as one of the guardians. The Hokage chuckled at the boy's reaction, who just stared back at him in disbelief. Yes, Naruto-kun, I'm asking you to officially adopt Naruko-chan as your younger sister. He said, holding up his hand to halt Naruto's impending question. And before you ask, it's completely legal as you are officially an adult once you receive your genin rank. And, since it is beyond question that you would certainly pass the test, I foresee no problems with my proposal. Naruto slowly looked up at him, eyes pleading with emotion and uncertainty. But, am I ready for this? The boy asked, suddenly unsure of himself, and Hiruzen had never seen the confident and strong young boy this vulnerable ever since he met him. All I really wanted was a family to call my own, but what if I can't protect her like how I can't protect my people back home? What if, Naruto, the Hokage said sternly, making Naruto flinch slightly, and Hiruzen sighed. If you keep on doubting yourself again, you'll never be able to move on with your life ever again. A brief memory of a blonde woman with brown eyes and wearing a green jacket suddenly flashed across his eyes, and Hiruzen let out a sad sigh. Ask yourself not, what ifs, ask yourself. What is? What is going to happen if you back down? What is going to happen if you don't move on and be stronger than you were yesterday? How can you protect those close to you if you can't save you from yourself? The Hokage's words struck a chord deep within Naruto's consciousness, and he mentally berated himself for forsaking his own nindo, his shinobi way. Never give up, never back down, keep striving and enduring. That's the basis for his very way of life. Shaking his head to clear them of negative thoughts, Naruto took a deep breath and sighed. He looked up at the Hokage who was looking at him in concern. Thank you, Gigi. You really are the wisest Kage in the elemental nations. Hiruzen chuckled as he knelt in front of him. You're wiser than you think, Naruto, so don't worry about it too much. The old man stated, and he smiled as he stood up. I expect you to be well behaved when she becomes your sister. Naruto nodded seriously as he held the quill, ready to sign his name onto the contract. I don't want to be a great-grandfather so soon, so take it slow. Naruto immediately spluttered as his face became tomato red as he glared at the old man. What the hell, Sarutobi, how can you even suggest that? Well, I may be old but I'm certainly not senile, Hiruzen replied with a grin. I've seen how you two act. Don't tell me a growing boy like you hadn't even taken a slight interest with such a beautiful girl like Naruko-chan? Well, maybe a little. Naruto stammered with a mock glare. Inside his mind a certain fox was laughing up a storm, much to his chagrin. But that's not the point here. Don't push it or I'll burn your Icha collection. Hiruzen paled slightly before a grin replaced it. As Hokage, I can ban the sale of ramen in and out of the village for the rest of the year. You wouldn't dare? Only if you stay away from my collection. The two of them stared intently into each other's eyes, neither of them flinching as they held their gaze. The staring contest continued, and one could see sparks flying between them. A tense silence followed, before both of them suddenly broke out in laughter. Naruto laughed as he wiped the tears from his eyes. Alright, you win, Gigi. The wizened Cage chuckled as he smiled. I always to do that with Naruto-chan, and she always gives in just as easily as you did when I threatened to take away her ramen. Naruto just grinned. I was going easy on you, old man, wouldn't want you bursting a vein or something, he said with a chuckle. Naruto signed the contract and handed it back to Hiruzen, who scanned it over one final time before nodding. Okay, we're done. Naruto-chan is now officially your sister, if I can break it to her, that is. He stated with a small smile. I trust you tell her about her own heritage? Hi Gigi, Naruto said seriously, I'll tell her when she's ready. I'm sure she'll surprise you, Naruto-kun, she's not unpredictable for nothing, you know. And judging by the way she looked at you when she walked out the door, the powerful man chuckled at the blonde male's blush, I think she'll accept the arrangement just fine. The Sandame then did a few hand signs and the privacy seal was dropped. Only a few minutes has passed in the real world, so Naruto-chan should be back right about now. And sure enough, the burgundy doors burst open to reveal the young girl with a happy smile on her face. Hey Gigi, I'm back, Naruto shouted before she noticed her friend in the room. Hey Naruto-kun, so how did your talk with Gigi go? Naruto nodded with a kind smile. It's all good. Hokage-sama allowed me to join the Shinobi Corps if I pass a certain test. The excited girl was practically bouncing on the balls of her feet at the news. That's great. That means you get to come with us on missions, she said excitedly, causing the two other occupants of the room to chuckle at her exuberance. Unbeknown to Naruto, this was the side which the girl only displayed to her closest people. She then noticed a paper in Naruto's hands, and she decided to ask, what's that you're holding, Naruto-kun? Naruto looked down at the object in question and grinned as he handed it to her, which she took and started to read. Why don't you take a look for yourself? He offered as he waited for the girl to finish. Naruto started to read out loud as she scanned the paper. I, as Hokage of Konoha, declare that one Uzumaki Naruto would officially be adopted. She stumbled over the words, not believing what she was reading, and she continued despite the growing feeling of hope in her heart, and be put under the care of one Yu Uzumaki and Naruto? Her eyes widened exponentially as she looked up at her friend turned family member, tears slowly welling in her eyes as she dropped the paper she was reading in shock. Her hands slowly came up to cover her mouth as she couldn't believe what was happening to her right now. Her silent plea for Naruto to miraculously be her family member had finally come true, and she was overwhelmed with emotion. Naruto stepped forward and placed a hand on one of her shoulders, making her watery eyes look up at him and into his beautiful azure orbs. There she saw compassion, understanding and love, unconditional love for her, and the silent message that he would never leave her alone again, no matter how impossible it may seem. She thanked whoever that was above for letting her stumble upon Naruto in the first place, and for that she was forever grateful. She sniffed as she looked up at Naruto, eyes watery and puffy. Oh Oni-chan. The blonde boy just smiled even wider when he heard the words he wanted to hear ever since he had found out Naruto shared his blood. Yes, Naruto-chan, I am your Oni-chan. From now on and forever, he said, grinning as he did. So, you better get used to me around here. Naruto just cried even harder. Oh Oni-chan. She couldn't take it any longer as she tackled her new brother in a bone-crushing hug, making both of them fall unceremoniously to the floor. Oni-chan. She cried out in happiness, and Naruto just hugged her back tighter as he laughed while she cried into his chest. Hiruzen just looked on with a warm smile on his face. He knew that the appearance of Naruto would forever change Naruto's, and quite possibly the entire world as they knew it. The old man couldn't help but look forward to the future. This is the start of something truly beautiful. Naruto was currently walking through the village in the afternoon heat from the Hokage's office towards his destination, which was right beside the Hokage mansion. Another wave of nostalgia assaulted him when he reminisced about the place where he began his shinobi career. The instructors, his friends, the third years, the first years, it really brought back many memorable memories. He remembered when he used to prank the academy instructors almost every day and always got detention because of it. Thinking back, his pranking skills really helped him in trap setting and stealth, as most of his pranks weren't detected until the last minute. He was broken out of his stupor when he arrived at the destination, which was the academy building. He would have gone in already, but he was currently losing circulation in his right arm. Anyo, Naruto-chan. Naruto said while poking the girl's head, trying to pry her off his poorly circulated arm. Can you let go of my arm now? I can't feel my hands. Ever since she had officially become his sister, Naruto had been stuck to him like glue on paper, refusing to let go of him for fear he would run off or disappear if she let go. Right now she was clinging to his right arm like a vice, which led to his current predicament. Naruto looked up at him with a pout. Do I have to Oni-chan? She asked innocently, which of course it wasn't as innocent as it sounded if Naruto's emotion sensing was accurate. She was doing this on purpose just to get a rise out of him. Since he's her new Oni-chan, she would want to have a little fun with her new brother. Yes, if not I can't write and I'll fail my test and I won't become a shinobi and I won't be able to bring you to Ichiraku's anymore, Naruto deadpanned. He smirked when he saw the girl's face grow paler by the minute and she finally let his arm free. Groaning at getting feeling back into his arm again, he looked at Naruto who looked sheepish and embarrassed. Don't worry Naruto-chan, it's not your fault. He reassured, you just couldn't control yourself, that's all. Naruto blushed as she placed her hands at her back, looking as innocent as possible. It's the first time I have an older brother, of course I can't control myself. She then smiled brightly up at him, but that's the fun part about it, wouldn't you say? Naruto chuckled as he walked in the front door, with Naruto following closely just behind him. Hi, whatever you say Naruko-heim. He smirked at the tomato-red blush on her face as he made his way through one of the corridors before stopping outside a door that read, Chunin Office. This must be it, Naruto said as he opened the door, and the first thing he saw was a yellow blur that rushed into the room and the next thing he knew he saw what appeared to be his sister glomping on a poor Chunin on the ground. He couldn't help but chuckle at her sister's antics as she was almost the same as he was, hyperactive and unpredictable. Iruka-sensei. Naruto shouted, causing Naruto to look up in slight surprise with a smile on his face. You won't believe the most amazing thing that has happened to me. The newly named Amino Iruka chuckled as he tried to pry his ex-student off him. Alright, hold your horses young lady, he said, causing the girl to pout. Let me guess, you've got a month's worth of ramen coupons? Naruto pouted harder as she shook her head. No, even better. She got off him and headed straight for Naruto, pulling him by his arm towards the scarred Chunin. I have an older brother. Iruka's eyes widened tenfold when he heard that, and he immediately began looking over the supposed older brother of his favorite student. The young blonde man had a smile on his face as he rubbed the back of his head, looking sheepish. After a minute's silence, Iruka spoke up. I trust that you didn't do anything inappropriate to my student? He asked, causing both blondes to blush. Naruto's deeper than the other blondes. Iruka-sensei. Naruto shouted. Naruto chuckled as he composed himself. Don't worry Naruko-chan, he's just messing with you. He said placatingly. Plus, if you were in his shoes, what would you do? Iruka gave him an appraising look when he said that. It had been a long time since Naruto had seen his favorite academy instructor again since the event at Turtle Island, and meeting the man again made the young blonde quite happy indeed. Naruto bowed her head. Sorry Iruka-sensei, she said, which the Chunin just waved it off. It's fine, he said, so tell me, what can I do for you today? Naruto handed the paper the Hokage gave him to the scarred Chunin, which he took and began to scan it. Hokage-sama gave me permission to join the Shinobi Corps and be placed with the graduating class. You just have to administer a test and we're done. Naruto explained. Truth be told, he had been eager to test his newfound skills and intellect on the Genin exams, since he failed them thrice already. It wouldn't hurt to pass it without being interfered by outside influences. Cough, Mizuki, cough. Iruka nodded. Uzumaki Naruto, eh? Okay, follow me. Since I'm free I'll be the one to administer your test. He said, turning around as he beckoned the two of them to follow him. The scarred teacher led them to one of the academy grounds, where 5 target dummies can be seen in the clearing. On the other side of the clearing, there was a table where multiple shuriken and kunai can be seen arranged on top of it. Iruka led Naruto towards the table while Naruto stood aside to watch. Once there, Iruka nodded towards the targets. Alright Naruto, first up is the weapons aptitude test. Hit as many targets with the bull's eye as you can with only 5 kunai and 5 shuriken. Naruto nodded as he picked up the required number of weapons and held them at the ready, 5 kunai and 5 shuriken in each hand. Ready, Iruka announced as Naruto tensed, closing his eyes as he mentally calculated the distance and the wind speed and the weight of his weapons as Naruto watched intently on the sidelines. Start. Without a moment's waste, he launched both sets of weapons at the same time towards their targets. The sounds of weapons whistling through the air can be heard before 10 simultaneous thuds were heard downrange. Opening his eyes, Naruto nodded in satisfaction as he had hit all the targets dead center. He looked back at Iruka, who had his jaw on the ground along with his clipboard. Naruto was cheering about how cool he was and how he can easily get Rookie of the Year if he joined earlier. Naruto was a humble man, well, after the merging anyway, but hearing the praise directed at him from Naruto made him feel accomplished and made him proud of his own abilities. Iruka finally managed to pick up his clipboard and find his voice. That's a perfect 10 out of 10 in less than 5 seconds. Only Uchiha Itachi has ever beaten that record, the scarred Chunin said in awe, and Naruto nodded with a smile, and Naruto was just standing there in awe of her new brother. Who knew that her Oni-chan can be such a badass, and be humble and kind at the same time? Certainly unlike a certain brooder she knew. Iruka cleared his throat as Naruto retrieved the weapons. Alright Naruto, since this is a field exam, there will not be a written portion, so we just have to skip to the 3 basic jutsus, he explained. Naruto just nodded. It would be easier this way, he mused, though he still wanted to try out the written test at a later date. Alright sensei, hit it, Naruto said. Iruka nodded. First up is the Kawarimi, replacement. He pointed towards a nearby chair. Replace yourself with that chair over there. The place where Naruto was originally standing was replaced by the chair while Naruto took its place, then he switched back. Nodding in satisfaction, Iruka spoke, alright. Now for the Henge transformation, change into an exact replica of me. Naruto nodded and he changed into Iruka, who smiled back at the real one before dispersing, revealing Naruto once more. Now last of all, the Bunshin clone, Iruka said, but was stopped by Naruto's raised hand. Yes? Can it be any form of clone? Naruto asked. Iruka nodded. It can as long as it's a clone. He clarified, slightly confused. The Bunshin was the easiest jutsu an academy student can master, with the exception of Naruto with her large reserves. He couldn't see why Naruto should had trouble with it. Naruto sighed in relief. Thank Kami, I suck at Bunshin, he said with a laugh, earning a sweat drop from Iruka and a laugh from Naruto. But I can do this. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Shadow Clone Jutsu. The clearing exploded in a cloud of smoke, and when it dissipated, there standing before Iruka were dozens of Narutos holding peace signs at him, and his clipboard quickly fell. Naruto was in a similar situation as her eyes widened at her brother's use of her new and favorite technique. How and where had he learned it? It doesn't matter much to Naruto at the moment since her view of her brother shot up to new heights as she cheered for him. Way to go Oni-chan. All the Narutos turned to her and they all grinned. Thanks, Naruko-chan. They all said at once before dispelling themselves, and the original was left standing in the academy grounds, a smile on his face. Oh okay, Iruka stuttered as he marked all the points on his clipboard. The boy had just performed a B-rank kinjutsu effortlessly and sporting the same number of clones Naruto had made without even feeling winded. The younger generation looks promising. I can't wait to see what they're going to accomplish in the future, he thought with a smile. You're officially a genin, Naruto. Iruka announced, and Naruto nodded with a small smile. The taijutsu test, I'll give it to you tomorrow during team placements, so don't be late. You've scored higher points than our Rookie of the Year, Uchiha Sasuke. The only one amongst the graduating class who comes close to your own practical scores is our Kunoichi of the Year, Uzumaki Naruto, who scored the highest in both written and practical tests for 3 years running, a record once held by Hitaki Kakashi. Iruka couldn't keep the note of pride out of his voice as he announced Naruto's scores. He was still in awe of the boy's skill for one so young. He swore he saw the Yondaime in Naruto when he was taking the tests. Naruto looked at his blushing sister with a raised eyebrow. Kunoichi of the Year, he asked, making Naruto blush even harder. Naruto grinned widely at her, and you're going to tell me all this when? Naruto spluttered as she tried to speak, I was going to tell you over ramen tonight. Naruto grinned as he chuckled. Then how about we celebrate it now? Iruka-sensei's treat. Yata. Hey, don't I get a say in this? An indignant Iruka shouted, causing all three of them to burst out laughing. Iruka retrieved a Hittite from his back pocket and tossed it to Naruto, who caught it with ease. "Congratulations Naruto, you've made it, on your first try too." Naruto smiled wistfully as ran his hand over the metal plate where the symbol of Konoha was engraved, and proceeded to tie it on his forehead, letting his bangs fall to the sides of his face and forehead. At that moment both Iruka and Naruto saw for a split second the Yondaime Hokage standing there instead of Naruto. The young blonde male turned towards them and smiled. "Well, what are we waiting for?" Naruto giggled as she cheered. "Ichiraku's, here we come." Iruka sighed as he checked his poor wallet, slumping his head in dismay when he saw it was only enough to cover his expenses for the week. It looks like he was back to eating fermented beans and ramen again this month. After having their share of the ramen, with Naruto eating just as much as Naruto, much to Iruka's horror, the new brother and sister were currently walking at a sedate pace towards Naruto's spacey apartment. Apparently, the villagers decided to buy her a new home to atone for their mistakes, and they bought her a house near the center of the village near the park years ago. Much to Naruto's relief, her apartment was spacious enough to house 2 bedrooms. He knew for a fact that Naruto wouldn't allow him to sleep on the couch. The meeting with the Ichirakus was a refreshing experience for Naruto, as he had missed his surrogate family a great deal back during the war. After hearing about him being the new big brother to Naruto, Ayame practically squealed in happiness as she hugged the daylights out of Naruto, much to the blonde girl's chagrin and Naruto's unending amusement. Tucci welcomed Naruto into the family with open arms and an extra-large serving of his favorite miso ramen, and also a hidden warning sent by the ramen chef. "Hurt her, and you're dead," were the exact words spoken to him by Tucci. Naruto decided to take his threat seriously, since the man emphasized his point by sharpening his cutting knife in front of him slowly and carefully, much to the amusement of Iruka, Ayame, a blushing Naruto, and a certain fox in his gut. And now here they were, walking hand in hand towards Naruto's apartment. Apparently Naruto didn't want to break physical contact with her new brother, and wanted to stay with him throughout the entire day, much to his embarrassment. Soon, they were at the front door to her apartment, and Naruto immediately went about unlocking the door and pulled her brother in once it opened. Taking a few moments to refocus his vision when Naruto switched on the lights, one word came to his mind: comfortable. Her apartment was spacious yet clean and orderly, with a small living room with a large red couch and a television set. Further back was a fully stocked kitchen and a guest bathroom, and down the corridor to left of the front door were the bedrooms. Naruto saw that his sister's bedroom was filled with orange fox plushies that she unsuccessfully tried to hide from him, causing him to burst out laughing at the irony of it all. There was also a dressing table, a queen-sized bed with red bed sheets, and a wardrobe along with a connected bathroom that linked to his room. He also noticed that Naruto didn't care that much about her appearance as much as the other girls she knew in the academy, judging by the lack of makeup she had on her dressing table. She said she would prefer spending most of her free time training rather than put on makeup to try and woo the boys. Her answer got her praise from Naruto and she blushed in appreciation. His own room was also spacious as there was the linked bathroom, a dressing table, a queen-sized bed and a wardrobe. Curiosity getting the better of him, Naruto had asked Naruto why she had an extra room prepared, and she answered saying that she still held on to hope, no matter how slim it was, that a long-lost family member was still alive and waiting for her. She then said her wish came true and Naruto came into her life, much to her joy. Naruto smiled sadly as he hugged a teary-eyed Naruto as she cried tears of happiness, and carried her to bed when she had fallen asleep in his arms. Naruto was currently staring up at the ceiling of his new room, waiting for the time to pass or his sleepiness to take over. He was still thinking about his future plans to deal with Kaguya with Kurama when he heard the door to his room open. Imagine his surprise and embarrassment when Naruto came in with an elegant purple nightgown that expressed her developing figure as she closed the door behind her. Sighing as he sat up on his bed, Naruto asked, "What is it, Naruto-chan?" Naruto looked hesitant as she played with her golden blonde hair which was freely flowing down her back and reached to her knees. She had wanted to do this with her precious big brother for a while now, so she mustered up her courage and spoke, "Oni-chan, can I sleep with you?" Naruto raised a surprised eyebrow in the dim lighting of the room, sitting up straighter. "Why? I can't sleep, she said shyly, shuffling her feet as she did. I don't want to feel alone again. I'm scared that this is some elaborate genjutsu just to break my heart. Naruto's eyes softened as he heard her pleading tone. I am scared that you'll disappear. I see, Naruto said, before he smiled, moving aside and patting the empty space beside him. Come here then. Without wasting any more time, she bolted towards the empty spot and proceeded to curl up beside him. Naruto laid back down on the bed as he wrapped his arms around his sister, slowly rocking her to sleep. He was about to drift off as well when she heard Naruto whisper something. Anyo, Oni-chan? Yes, Naruto-chan? She proceeded to kiss him on the forehead, leaving him frozen in place. Good night. An involuntary surge of happiness welled up within him, and he resisted the urge to shout out to the world about how happy he was feeling. He had finally known what a family's love was, and he couldn't be more relieved and happy. He had found his purpose of living, a person he would die to protect. Breaking out of his stupor, he smiled as he responded by kissing her forehead, earning a blush from her in return. Good night, Naruto-chan. As the new brother and sister drifted off under the night sky, their hands unconsciously intertwined together during the night with small smiles gracing their lips. The next day, as the golden rays of the morning sun shone through the lace curtains of the room, illuminating the peaceful sleeping face of Naruto, whose eyes twitched a little before slowly opening, and she wondered why she was feeling so warm and safe at the moment. Her purple eyes widened as memories from last night flashed through her mind, and she immediately looked around, softening as she laid her eyes on the sleeping form of Naruto still holding her in an embrace, and she relaxed as her fears subsided. The young girl was scared that yesterday's events were just a series of illusions caused by a genjutsu, and she was very worried that her newfound happiness was just a cruel joke played by someone. She smiled warmly as she snuggled deeper into her brother's chest, closing her eyes as she tried to get some more sleep. Suddenly, her bedside alarm clock sounded off, and Naruto had to resist the urge to groan as she wanted to spend as much time with her new precious person. She blushed as her thoughts suddenly derailed and headed somewhere inappropriate, and she shook her head vigorously to clear them as she slipped out of Naruto's embrace and stopped the alarm clock, which showed it was about 8 in the morning. She berated herself for feeling that way towards her brother, which was wrong to her in so many ways. But, in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but feel that her feelings were right. Naruto had never felt this way towards anyone before, not even Sasuke or Kiba back in the academy. Sasuke, she wouldn't even give him the light of day with her, and Kiba was just too boisterous and loud to her liking. Her growing feelings towards her new brother were different, which to her was 100 times more powerful than her slight feelings toward the Inuzuka heir. She sighed as she shook her head to clear her thoughts. She would dwell on those feelings later, and figure out on her own what her feelings were at this point in her own time. Good morning, Naruto-chan, a voice called, and Naruto jumped slightly as she turned to face a fully awake Naruto with a warm smile on his face. Did you sleep well? He asked. Naruto nodded. Yes, I did. Thank you for asking, Oni-chan. She replied cheerfully. How long were you awake? Not long, the boy replied, stretching his muscles in his arms as he did so. A few minutes ago when I saw you stop that annoying clock. Naruto giggled. Sorry about that. I wanted for us to stay in a little longer. Naruto sighed as he stood up from the bed. Though I would like that as it gives us more brother-sister bonding time. Naruto blushed as she remembered her thoughts from earlier, quickly quashing them before it could go any further. We do have team placements to attend, you know. Naruto nodded. Alright, I'll go change then. Without waiting for an answer, she ran into the bathroom and closed it shut, but not before calling out, there's a fresh towel and toothbrush in the dressing table. You can use my toothpaste since you don't have one. Naruto chuckled as he pulled out a scroll. You've got it, Naruto-chan, he muttered as he channeled chakra into the scroll, and a set of clothes came out in a puff of smoke. Before leaving the Hokage's office, Naruto had requested the old Kage for a new set of clothes and new equipment, to which the old man happily complied as he immediately ordered one of his most trusted Anbu, Neko, to fulfill the order. Additionally, Naruto had also requested tri-pronged kunais to be made and also some high-quality chakra-conducive ink and fuinjutsu supplies, and the ever-perceptive Hiruzen had a pretty good idea on what they were for as he had them ordered and made personally. He began to slip into his new attire, which consisted of an orange shirt over a fishnet bodysuit with a gray hoodie jacket with a red whirlpool design on the back over it, blue shinobi pants held together by a black belt, and a pair of black sandals. Naruto proceeded to attach 2 kunai holsters to his thighs, one on each leg, and a weapons pouch to his waist. The jacket he wore also served a second purpose. The pockets was where he stored all his sealing scrolls and fuinjutsu supplies through an applied storage seal which stored his belongings away in a pocket dimension, so he wouldn't have to carry much during long travels. He silently thanked his father and Kurama for teaching him that. It would be a pain to lug around all that extra equipment when he was traveling. "You're welcome," the Biju in question said. Naruto chuckled as he zipped up his jacket. "You've been quiet all night, what's up?" "Oh nothing, just enjoying the drama between you and the vixen," Kurama said, grinning at his container's blush. "Shut it Baka Kitsune," he lightly snapped, and the blonde boy left it at that. He was about to head to the bathroom to wash up when the door to his room opened, revealing a fully dressed Naruto standing there, a warm smile on her face. "You ready to go yet, Oni-chan?" she asked, while also noticing the new change in clothes, which made Naruto all the more attractive to her eyes. She mentally chided herself, "No. Bad Naruto-chan, you can't think of him that way. He's your brother for Kami's sake." But no matter how much she kept telling herself to stop, Naruto's feelings towards her brother just kept growing stronger, and Naruto wasn't even trying to cause such a reaction from her. Naruto shook his head negatively. "Not yet. Just let me brush my teeth and wash up. You go on and take your breakfast first, I'll catch up," he said. "Okay," she called out as she went to take her breakfast, "but be quick. We don't want to be late during team placements." "Hi," Naruto called back, "make sure to check your milk to see if it's spoiled. I've checked it last night and I saw it's expired." And, lo and behold, when Naruto checked one of her cartons of milk, she found that it was way past the expiration date. She quickly threw them in the bin and opened up a new carton, this one she bought a few days ago, and poured herself a glass. If Naruto hadn't warned her, she would have most likely chugged down that carton of expired milk without a second thought. She shivered as she thought of going to the bathroom all day due to an upset tummy. It wouldn't be pretty, that much she knew. In the bathroom, Naruto grimaced when he remembered his own encounter with the expired milk. That was one of his most embarrassing and painful memories ever. Period. "Good thing you had me sealed inside you," Kurama remarked, amusement clear in his tone. "Or you would have been admitted to a ward and have your insides cleaned because of it." And much to Naruto's chagrin, the fox wouldn't let him hear the end of it. After enjoying a breakfast of rice balls and milk courtesy of Naruto, the Uzumaki siblings were now standing in front of a blacksmith store named Tetsu no Konoha, or Iron of the Leaf. It was located near the center of the village, just a few streets away from Ramen Ichiraku. Naruto looked at her brother in bewilderment. "Why are we here, Naruto-ni? Isn't the academy in the other direction?" she asked. She had been a little curious when Naruto wanted to take a detour to the academy, but she hadn't expected him to visit a blacksmith of all places. Sure, she visited a few herself, mostly to replace her kunais and shurikens, though she figured that Naruto needed to gather a few supplies of his own. Naruto nodded with a small smile. "Yes, but Hokage Gigi promised me to make these kunai that I requested for me, and I'm here to collect them," he explained cheerfully, making the girl nod in understanding. He then ushered her inside. "Come on, let's go in." Inside, sitting behind the counter was a fairly heavy-set man in his late 40s with graying dark hair and brown eyes. And those same eyes lit up when he saw the Uzumaki siblings enter as he stood up to greet them. "Ah, welcome to my humble abode. What can I do for you today?" Naruto stepped up to the counter and placed down a note. "I was told that Hokage-sama had ordered some special kunai from you?" Seeing the man nod in confirmation, Naruto continued, "I'm here to collect them." "Here's the pass." "Well, you've come at the right time," the man said as he turned around after scanning the note to confirm its authenticity to rummage through the countless racks of weapons of all shapes and sizes. "To be frank, I'm actually quite confused at first when Hokage-sama asked me to make them, since nobody had used them since the Yondaime Hokage." Off to the side, Naruto's eyes widened as she heard those words. Her brother was using something that hadn't been used by anyone since the Yondaime himself? Just when Naruto thought she had her brother figured out, he would then go and surprise her again with something even more outrageous and cool. A few minutes later, a few dozen scrolls were placed on the counter as the man finally fished out the last scroll from the back, and that's the last one. I've applied the seal on the handle as Hokage-sama requested and sealed them into these scrolls. The payment's already been made, so no worries there. The man said cheerfully. Naruto shook the man's hand as he sealed all the scrolls away into his storage seal. Tell Hokage-sama it's a pleasure doing business with him. Naruto nodded and waved at the man as he followed Naruto on the way out, and the both of them started to make their way towards the academy. Naruto turned to him, expression curious. So, what's in the scrolls? She asked. The number of scrolls were a lot, and even with her limited knowledge of Fuinjutsu she could tell that a large number of objects were sealed in them. What were they? She had no clue. That was why she was asking right now. Naruto chuckled. There's special kunais that I am planning to use in the future. He said. Of course, he could use them now if he wanted to, but decided against it as it could draw too much attention to himself and Naruto. He would never forgive himself if his father's enemies came after him, or worse, went after Naruto herself. Really? Can I see them? The excitable girl asked, eager to know what was so special about the kunais that made her brother buy them in large numbers. Naruto chuckled at her eagerness. I'll show it to you tonight when we go home, not right now though. Naruto pouted, but nodded nonetheless. Hi, Oni-chan. Let's just get to the academy then. Then what are we waiting for? Naruto asked with a grin. Let's get going. Last one there is a rotten shinobi. With that, he bolted towards the academy by jumping onto the rooftops, with Naruto soon joining him, both laughing all the way. The Konoha Academy's graduating class was currently waiting for their senseis to arrive, and the eager young shinobi were chatting adamantly among themselves, and in one case, sleeping. This year's batch of genin saw the highest number of heirs and heiresses from the most prestigious clans in Konoha graduating in the same year, and suffice to say many saw them as the greatest generation of shinobi Konoha has ever produced. Most notable were Nara Shikamaru of the Nara clan, who was currently dozing off at the end of the class. Akamichi Choji of the Akamichi clan, who was munching on a bag of chips. Yamanaka Ino of the Yamanaka clan, who was currently having a glaring contest with her rival and friend Haruno Sakura over who gets to sit with the last of the Uchiha clan, Uchiha Sasuke, who was brooding beside the window while tuning out the argument that was beside him and thinking about how he would kill that man. There was also Aburame Shino of the insect using Aburame clan, who remained emotionless throughout the waiting session. Inazuka Kiba of the Inazuka clan, who was petting his ninkin Akamaru who was in his jacket. And, last but not least, there was Hyuga Hinata of the Hyuga clan, who was busy scanning the room with her pale lavender eyes for her best friend. Since joining the academy, Hinata had always been very shy around others due to her status as clan heiress and her father's strict attitude towards her since her mother's death. She wallowed in her self-pity and sorrow because of that. Before Uzumaki Naruto came into her life, the one who gave her friendship and kindness and strength to do what she believes in, not what others expected of her. In a short time, Naruto had broken Hinata out of her shell and instilled the confidence she so desperately needed into the lavender-eyed girl. And the Hyuga heiress became a force to be reckoned with during the academy, sweeping aside all opposition except for Naruto who she was nipping at the heels. She had also earned her father's respect after the man saw her progress in the academy, much to her joy and happiness. She couldn't repay Naruto for what she did that turned her life for the better. Naruko-chan, where are you? Hinata thought worriedly, you're not normally this late, what's keeping you? Of course, she had heard the rumors that Mizuki had sabotaged the test and purposely failed Naruto out of spite, and in a rare moment of rage Hinata wanted to strike a Juken palm to the man's heart. After resolving the situation with the Hokage, Hinata was sure that Naruto had passed the test, she had faith she did. She was snapped out of her thoughts when the door suddenly opened, and her eyes widened in joy at the familiar shade of blonde hair she grew to adore. All chatter suddenly stopped as everyone in the room turned to look at the newcomer, most showing surprise while some showed indifference and some showed approval, at the sudden appearance of their kunoichi of the year, and object of most boys' affections, Uzumaki Naruto. Hinata was the first out of her seat as she quickly glomped her best friend. Naruko-chan, she squealed, I knew the rumors weren't true. You passed after all. Naruto just chuckled at her best friend as she pointed at her hitai-ate around her neck, tied like a necklace much like Hinata's. Yep, I passed Hina-chan, she declared with a huge smile. Seeing her other friends starting to move towards them, Hinata was about to say something when Naruto suddenly turned and shouted at the door, "Ha! Told you I would win." The entire class went silent as they stared at Naruto like she had grown a second head. Hinata was the first to speak. "Anyo, Naruto-chan? Who are you talking to?" she asked. The blonde couldn't have just randomly talked to a door, can she? She may be hyperactive at times, but she hasn't shown signs of insanity yet. Before anyone could comment further, as Kiba was halfway opening his mouth, when a new voice entered the room. "Not unless you called tricking me into believing you were hurt and got a 10-second head start fair, then yes, you win." The voice, a male one, said, amused. Naruto giggled, much to the shock and delight of the boys, who had never heard the cute blonde giggle before since starting the academy, as she smiled. "Don't be such a sore loser, and you're paying me for ramen tonight," she declared triumphantly just as a new figure stepped into the room. To reveal a handsome blonde boy about their age with spiky hair and was taller than most of them with a charming smile on his face, which caused some of the girls to actually have stars in their eyes. The rest of the class was stunned out of their wits as they thought they saw a younger Yondaime standing before them. The blonde boy chuckled as he shook his head. Hi, whatever you say," he said in admission. Naruto smiled triumphantly at that while the class remained dead silent, first by the fact that Naruto had actually giggled and second by the appearance of the blonde boy who looked as if he could defeat any one of them with ease. Even Shikamaru was wide awake and Choji had stopped munching his chips. If the situation wasn't so tense, Naruto would have started laughing at the expressions on everyone's faces. Hinata was the first to snap out of the shock by the sudden appearance of the blonde male. "Naruto-chan, who is this?" she asked, and judging by the forehead protector, he was also a shinobi. Naruto smiled even brighter at her if that was even possible. "Hinata-chan, allow me to introduce to you my new big brother, Uzumaki Naruto Oni-chan." The class was stunned at her declaration as they turned to look at the blonde boy in shock who just waved at them. "Naruto Oni-chan, meet my best friend Hyuga Hinata and the rest of my class," she said to him. Naruto bowed slightly. "It's an honor to meet you all," he politely said with a grin. "I hope we can get along." He had brushed up his manners while alone in his mindscape with Kurama on the way here, and thinking back to all the times he had unknowingly or knowingly disrespected or insulted someone or another with his poor manners and loudmouth attitude, he supposed that learning to be polite and soft-spoken was a long time coming for him. Nevertheless, he smiled warmly when he saw all of his friends again alive and well. Shikamaru's intelligent mind was going a mile a minute as he tried to process the information in front of him. What the hell? He's her older brother, and an Uzumaki to boot? That explains the similarities, but why does he look like as if he can beat all of us and make it look easy? This is so troublesome, he thought as he decided to just go back to sleep, deeming it too troublesome for him to think anymore. The rest of the Rookie 9 had varied reactions. Shino was just as emotionless as ever. Kiba was eyeing the blonde boy who he saw as a threat to his position as the alpha male. Ino and Sakura were already on Naruto as they bombarded the poor girl with question after question. Choji just continued to eat his chips, while hoping that Naruto was a good friend to talk to. Hinata was congratulating her best friend for finally having a family member she always dreamed of. And Sasuke was eyeing the blonde boy in question, trying to measure his power and compare it with his own. The unique aura that the blonde gave off resonated with power and authority, and Sasuke was contemplating whether he would take that sort of power for himself. Hinata was smiled at Naruto as she shook his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Naruto-san," she chirped happily, and Naruto idly wondered what had caused such a drastic, but positive change in the Hyuga heiress. "I hope you're treating Naruto-chan right, or we're going to have a slight problem," she added with a sickly sweet smile, which promised pain if the wrong answer was given. Naruto nodded with a grin, the threat heard loud and clear. "Of course, I had to make up for all the times I hadn't been there for her when she really needed it," he said with a sad voice, and turned to look at his sister, who also wore an understanding smile. "I'll never leave her side again, that's a promise of a lifetime." He earned a grateful glomp from said girl after he said that. "Thank you, Oni-chan." Naruto just laughed as the blonde girl just clung to him like there's no tomorrow, and he was getting used to the extra weight of his sister whenever she tried to jump on him out of nowhere. It was then Kiba approached Naruto with a slight flush on his face, which didn't go unnoticed by Naruto, who narrowed his eyes in suspicion. "That's great, Naruto-chan," the Inuzuka heir said. "Why don't we go celebrate at Ichiraku's after team placements?" "Might treat." Naruto felt an involuntary urge to punch the dog user in the face for deliberately asking his sister out on a date right in front of her brother. His new big brother's senses were yelling at him to do something, while his feelings were also yelling the same, though for different reasons entirely. Naruto released the breath he never thought he held when he saw his cute sister shook her head no. "Sorry Kiba-kun, but I've got the rest of the day planned with Oni-chan," she explained, and Kiba deflated before he glared at Naruto out of the corner of his eyes. "He's still new to the village, and I still got tons of things I want to show him. Speaking of which, how did you become a shinobi? You hadn't taken the test with us," Ino practically shouted, making her friends wince. Naruto reached up and tightened his Hidai-8, fixing his bangs as he did. "True, but Hokage-sama gave me permission to join the shinobi corps if I took the standard graduation test, which I passed yesterday. Am I right, Iruka-sensei?" he asked, and as if on cue the scarred Chunin entered the room. "Yes, you are Naruto," Iruka said, and he turned to the rest of the class who gave him their undivided attention, a rare thing for them to do. "All right everyone. As you may have known, Uzumaki Naruto will be joining us as a fellow shinobi of Konoha. So I expect every one of you, and yes I'm talking about you too, Kiba," the brown-haired teacher said sternly to the wild-haired boy who was grumbling, "to show him the proper respect you would give to your classmates and teammates and fellow shinobi. Do you understand?" Receiving a chorus of highs later, Iruka nodded. "All right, now please take your seats, I will be announcing the teams," he declared, as he waited for them to take their seats, subtly noticing that the Uzumaki siblings were sitting together, very closely if he may add. Iruka mentally shook his head in amusement as he began calling out the teams. After a few minutes, the first 6 teams were called out, and Naruto leaned forward intently as he idly wondered if the teams would be different given the odd number of graduates, courtesy of him. Team 7 will consist of Uchiha Sasuke. The raven-haired boy nodded indifferently as his fangirls squealed and cheered for him. Haruno Sakura, a shout came from the pink-haired girl, as she kept shouting about how true love always wins at Ino, who slumped her head in dismay while the other girls groaned. Naruto also noticed that Naruko was holding his hand worriedly as she gritted her teeth nervously as the next name was called. Uzumaki Naruko. Now it was the guy's turn to groan at not being on the same team as the cutest girl in the class, while Naruko's eyes widened as she turned to look at her brother in slight panic, who just reassuring squeezed her hand and smiled kindly, signifying everything was all right. Unknown to them, they failed to notice the last Uchiha smirking, eyes filled with slight lust and want. Naruko was his to begin with, strong, smart, attractive and not annoying, the perfect attributes he looked for in a wife, and he swore he was going to make her his if it's the last thing he did. But unknown to him also, all of his dark feelings were being read like an open book by a certain blonde boy as the temperature in the room dropped slightly and killer intent filled the room. But it was gone as fast as it appeared, causing the rest of the class to dismiss it as nothing. Before Naruto could even plan about how he should get back at the Uchiha for mentally violating his sister, Iruka continued, and due to the odd number of graduates this year, Team 7 will have an extra temporary member until further notice from Hokage-sama. Iruka announced as he ignored the surprised gasps from his students as they wondered on who was going to be the 4th member. The last member will be Uzumaki Naruto. Silence was the answer he was given with, and then all hell broke loose. Naruto couldn't help but groan. Today was going to be circus act, he just knew it. As if fate was answering him by flipping him the bird, Inuzuka Kiba shouted loudly his obvious disapproval. What? Kiba shouted in anger when Iruka announced all the teams as the boy looked indignant and unconvinced. Naruko glared the dog user slightly. His disapproval of Naruto's placement in Team 7 was, in her mind, an indirect insult towards her brother as a shinobi of Konoha. But he only joined yesterday. How can he be put in the same team as Sasuke and Naruko-chan? Kiba asked in a slightly louder tone. It was bad enough that he wasn't put on the same team as his crush, but for him, along with another good-looking guy, to be on the same team with Naruko when he only joined them yesterday threw him over the edge. He was not going to stay quiet after this turn of events. After Team 7 was announced, Team 8 had been him, Hinata and Shino. Team 9 was still active and Team 10 had consisted of the Ino Shika Cho trio. Kiba could readily agree to the others, but he was still adamant about their decision to put Naruto into Team 7. If anything, it should be him taking the blonde's place. The scarred Chunin instructor sighed as he shook his head in disappointment as he looked at the boy. Kiba, I am very disappointed in you, he reprimanded. Barely a few minutes had passed and you're already acting as if Naruto is beneath you. That is not exemplary behavior for a Konoha shinobi, he said sternly, causing the boy to shut up instantly, though his eyes still shone with defiance. Iruka sighed. It looks like you are still unconvinced. Then an idea hit him as he turned to the young blonde shinobi, who had his eyes closed in a meditative position at his desk, with his sister sitting beside him trying to do the same, but failing miserably at it, much to Iruka's silent amusement. Naruto, he called. Naruto opened one of his azure orbs and looked up at the brown-haired Chunin. What is it, Iruka-sensei? I still haven't graded your taijutsu yet, and I believe we have the perfect opportunity to do that right now. Iruka announced, making the rest of the class look stunned at the news. Naruto had not only passed the graduation test, but he passed it without taking the taijutsu portion of the test. Many of the girls were starting to eye him in a new light while the boys started seethe in jealousy. Naruto however acted indifferent as he just shrugged and he rolled his shoulders as he stood and walked over to Iruka, with Naruto following behind him. Guess that's alright with me. I haven't had a good fight in a long time, he said with a slight smile. So, who's my opponent? Well, Iruka started, adopting a slight thinking pose. I was thinking about putting Sasuke against you, but since Kiba is unconvinced about your abilities as a shinobi, I'll let him take you on before your Jonin senseis arrive. Alright, Kiba shouted cockily as he smirked at Naruto, stating confidently. Just you wait, soon I'll show everyone in Naruto-chan who's the top dog here. Akamaru on the other hand lowly whined as the puppy retreated further into his master's jacket. The small canine had already sensed the tremendous power radiating off the blonde, and the ninkin was sure that the blonde boy in front of them was no ordinary boy. The small pup felt pity towards his partner. The blonde was way out of his league. Naruto immediately lost the cheerful expression on his face as he looked at Kiba coldly, promptly making him and the people around him back away from him in fear. Naruto was also slightly scared at first, but when she looked at him, she noticed that all of his anger wasn't directed at her or anyone in particular. It was directed at the Inuzuka heir, who was close to wetting his pants. Even Iruka sweated a little at the blonde's obvious display of power. No normal boy should possess such an overwhelming aura. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he spoke. Listen here, dog boy, and you listen well. His voice was icy like the frozen north. Unknown to everyone, he was letting a sliver of Kurama's chakra into his vocal cords, adding more weight to his statement while making everyone shake in fear. I don't care about you showing that you're some top dog alpha here, or about me taking the spotlight away from you as the class clown away from you. His every word, every syllable was laced with so much coldness most would have thought Kiba had caught frostbite from it. But, if you talk about Naruko-chan, my precious sister, like she's just some trophy to be won. Well, pray that you won't find out when I get my hands on you, dog breath. He left the threat hang in the air as he slowly and audibly cracked his knuckles, making sure every crack was crisp and loud enough for everyone to hear. Iruka could have sworn, not in his many years of teaching, had any of his classes been as quiet as this one was now. Just as quickly as it appeared, a neutral but calm look replaced the cold one on Naruto's face and everyone relaxed as everyone looked at him in slight fear, Kiba more than most. Even Shikamaru was shocked awake by the tense atmosphere, and that was saying something. Naruto smiled a bit as he bowed his head slightly. I hope we've reached an understanding, Inuzuka-san. Now, shall we head to the sparring grounds? He said curtly before walking out of the room, heading towards the sparring grounds, leaving the stunned class behind. And a heavily blushing Naruto. Hinata leaned over to her best friend's ears. I didn't know he was the overly protective type, but still, she giggled as she smiled. She's a good catch, Naruto-chan. Handsome, smart, and very protective. The perfect boy. She never got to finish her sentence as her mouth was instantly covered by a pair of hands, courtesy of a tomato-red Naruto. Shut up. Databane. She cried out in embarrassment before she went after her brother while desperately fighting down the blush on her face. Never in her life had someone so openly said that they would protect her and wouldn't let anyone treat her like some trophy. She felt warmth welling inside of her as she thought of the words Naruto had said to protect her, the confident and possessive tone he spoke with, and the way his cerulean eyes shone with untamed anger as he defended her. She was snapped out of her thoughts when she felt a hand on her shoulder, making her look into the beautiful cerulean eyes of Naruto, who had a concerned look on his face, making her feel all warm inside. "Naruto-chan, you alright?" he asked in concern as he rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Sorry about earlier, I had to get my message across to Dogboy." Naruto blushed at his concern and shook her head as she embraced him, resting her head on his chest, listening to his strong and steady heartbeat. "Don't worry about it," she replied, "and I think Kiba-kun got the message quite clear after your little stunt." Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he led his sister towards the sparring ring, right arm still draped over her shoulders, never breaking physical contact. "I was never one for theatrics, but I handled it well, don't you think?" he joked, receiving a giggle and a light jab to his ribs from Naruto in response. "I think it was good," Kurama said telepathically, sounding amused. "Did you see the look on the dog boy's face when you said you would do Kami knows what to him?" "Huh?" He laughed. "I'm willing to bet 1,000,000 ryo that he pissed his pants right there at the end." "Didn't think he would get scared so easily," Naruto mentally chuckled, but so was my unwarranted reaction to his remark. Kurama howled in laughter as he spoke with mirth. "Don't you see? You were just protecting your mate when you heard that remark and went all protective of her. That's what having a soulmate is all about." Kurama laughed again at his host's blush as the blonde tried to gather his thoughts. "But, how? I mean, I do love her already, but I don't know if it's familial love or—" Naruto hesitated as he fumbled with the last word, while trying to hide his growing blush from Naruto who was right beside him. Kurama sighed as he lay down on his paws, already knowing the dilemma which he was faced with. "Don't worry about it, kid," he replied. "The best thing to do at this moment is to follow your instincts. It helped me. So why not you?" he added with a chuckle, making Naruto roll his eyes at the fox's antics. Arriving at the sparring grounds, Naruto waited on one side of the sparring ring in the middle as he waited for the rest for the class to file out, all of them eager and curious to see his abilities. Naruto stood to the side with her friends and he noticed that Kiba had stood across from him as the dog user glared daggers at him, but he also noticed that the boy's pants were different than the ones he wore in the morning when he came in. Kurama chuckled. "See? Told you so?" Naruto chuckled back mentally. "Alright. Knock it off, Kurama ni, the fight's about to start." Iruka stood in between them as he listed down the rules. "Alright you two, the rules are simple." He began. "First one to knock your opponent out of the ring or until either one of you can't fight anymore, wins. If the spar gets out of hand, I'll step in if necessary." Both Naruto and Kiba nodded as Iruka continued. "Ready?" Both boys got into their respective taijutsu stances, with Naruto adopting his personal taijutsu stance while Kiba got into the Inuzuka clan style on all fours, causing the crowd of students to wait in anticipation. "Begin!" Iruka shouted as he stepped away from the ring. Kiba wasted no time as he dashed forward at the blonde at speed, intending to end the fight with one hit. His hopes of an easy victory were shattered as Naruto sidestepped the punch that was aimed for his head, skillfully turning around and landing a roundhouse kick at Kiba's back, who stumbled forward at the force of the kick. Kiba growled before charging again, this time going for feint by going for the blonde's stomach, quickly changing stances and went for a sweeping kick, intending to knock his opponent's feet out from under him. The Inuzuka heir was once again denied his chance when Naruto saw the attack coming from a mile away and just dodged both of his attacks by jumping over them before striking a palm thrust at Kiba's chest, sending him skidding backwards before stopping at the edge of the ring. Naruto stood there with his arms crossed, eyes cold and serious. "Is that all you've got?" "I'm not impressed, dog boy," he said dismissively, making the other boy growl in anger. Naruto extended an arm and made a "come hither" motion at Kiba, smirking as he did. "Come on, Inuzuka. Show me that your clan is not all bark and no bite. You'll pay for that," Kiba shouted. Dashing forward again in an attempt to hit the blonde in the chest, he only managed to hit air before he was sent flying when Naruto suddenly appeared under his guard and uppercutted him in the chin. While still in midair, Kiba had only a second to clear the cobwebs in his head before Naruto appeared above him, twisting his body before slamming a falling axe kick into the dog user's midsection, sending him crashing to the ground with a painful thud. As the dust cleared, Kiba laid on the ground, coughing in pain as he panted and spat out the blood in his mouth where he had bit his lip. Naruto landed gracefully on the ground as he crossed his arms, not feeling the slightest bit winded from the fight. "You done yet?" Naruto asked with a blank expression. Kiba spat out some of the blood in his mouth, snarling at his opponent as his bloody teeth was shown. "Not yet," he shouted, before dashing forward again. Seeing the charge, Naruto braced himself as Kiba came at him again, and again, and again. Jabs, punches, kicks, knees and elbows were exchanged between the two combatants as Kiba tried in vain to find a hole in Naruto's seemingly unbreakable defense. Not even fighting Sasuke was this hard, Kiba idly mused before he was sent flying when Naruto landed a solid kick in his stomach, sending the dog user skidding towards the edge of the ring. Coughing slightly as he struggled to stand, Kiba looked up to see Naruto still standing in the same spot as before. The blonde hadn't even moved from his original position since the spar started. Kiba's eyes could only widen in shock as he looked into the blonde's cold cerulean eyes, which were bordering on Arctic blue. Shivering slightly at the look, he coughed weakly before raising his hand in defeat. "I forfeit, sensei." "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto," Iruka announced to the stunned class. Kiba was definitely one of the best fighters in their class, and some say he was in a class of his own and only Sasuke or Naruto could even stand a chance against him. But Naruto had defeated him with ease and in such a short time, and the blonde was not even winded after the fight. What was most shocking was the fact that he had not been hit once since the beginning of the spar, which was nothing short of amazing. As Kiba tried to walk back to his friends, he suddenly felt an arm wrap around his midsection to support him as he walked. Looking up, the Inuzuka heir was shocked to see none other than Naruto was helping him limp back to his friends. The blonde had an appraising look on his face. "Not bad, Inuzuka-san. You've lasted longer than most people when they fought with me, and I've fought plenty of them," Naruto commented with a grin. Kiba merely grunted in acknowledgement as beginnings of a smile began to appear on his face. The blonde male patted him on the back. "My advice is this: train harder, and find a purpose to become stronger than yesterday, something for you to believe in and to be willing to fight for. That's how I've become so strong." Naruto looked up in the direction of his sister, a warm smile on his face. Following his gaze, Kiba immediately understood what, or who, drove his former combatant to become this strong. The dog user shook his head. He was already beaten the moment he had put his foot in his mouth with his insensitive comments. Kiba then grinned back at the blonde, his earlier misgivings about him gone and were now replaced by respect. "You know, you're actually a decent guy, Naruto," he began, chuckling before he winced at the pain in his stomach. "I need to go home and think about what you've said, but I expect a rematch with you in the near future." "Deal?" Naruto merely chuckled. "Deal," he replied, extending his free arm. "Friends?" Kiba looked at the offered limb, before returning a forearm clasp with the blonde boy. "Friends." Everyone who witnessed the scene couldn't help but feel respect at the blonde's sportsmanship, which was rare in the shinobi world. Naruto smiled in pride as she beamed proudly at her brother. His people's skills were truly a sight to see. It was then they noticed Iruka walking over to them, a smile on his face. "Well done you two, especially you Naruto," Iruka said with pride. "Being a shinobi of Konoha means helping and protecting your fellow shinobi, which you did splendidly." He continued as he smiled, "Congratulations Naruto, you've passed your taijutsu test." Naruto smiled and nodded. "Thank you, sensei. That doesn't seem like a fight to me," a dark voice said. Everyone turned in surprise to see the last Uchiha talking. A smirk on his face. Dog breath over there barely gave the blonde dobi a challenge. He scoffed, "That's what you get for being weak, loser." Kiba growled in anger as Naruto tried to hold the enraged boy back, holding him by the boy's arms. "What did you say, you bastard? Come on Naruto, let me at him. He insulted you too." Kiba continued to struggle out of Naruto's hold, but the blonde held firm as he barely moved a muscle and turned to face the smirking raven-haired Uchiha, his expression unreadable. Then, to the shock of everyone who was there as they were expecting a short argument to erupt between the two, Naruto did something no one expected. He laughed out loudly, causing the whole class to stay silent and the smirk on the Uchiha's face to vanish almost instantly as he glared at the laughing blonde. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked irritably as his glare intensified, trying to goad a reaction from the blonde male. He then smirked. "If you're laughing because you are too weak to face me, an elite, then be my guest." No. Naruto wheezed out as he tried to catch his breath, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes as he tried to repress the chuckle that escaped from him, making Sasuke all the angrier. Naruto took a deep breath as he sobered up. "I'm laughing because of the joke you pulled about Kiba being a loser and all. That would really funny if it were true." Sasuke narrowed his eyes. Naruto continued to speak, his expression calming from his mirth. "I mean, he kept up with me the entire time we were sparring, never backing down even when he knows that I far outclass him. In friendly spars, it's not all about winning the match, it's the lessons you take from it whether you win or lose. Isn't that right, Kiba?" Kiba merely nodded after he had calmed down, as the blonde's words made a lot of sense, especially to him. The rest of the class was in a similar mindset as well, and was surprised at the insight and maturity Naruto had shown when he had said that. Sasuke scoffed uncaringly. "So what? I am an Uchiha, and I can beat the likes of you in under a minute," he said arrogantly with a smug smirk. "Care to bet on that, Uchiha-san?" Naruto asked, his eyebrow rose and putting as much sarcasm into the honorific as possible, which further infuriated the last Uchiha. Sasuke turned to Iruka as he spoke. "Sensei, I demand that I be put to the test with the blonde Dobi, so that I can put him in his place, amongst the losers." Meanwhile, Naruto growled as she unconsciously clenched and unclenched her hands, all the while grinding her teeth in anger. Every single word that came out of the Emo King's mouth was always derogatory or a direct insult to Naruto. Unknown to the girl, her classmates backed away from her in fear as a dangerously dark aura appeared around her which clung to her like a cloak. She was very angry at the raven-haired Uchiha for insulting and belittling her brother who had clearly proven his worth as a worthy shinobi of Konoha. Iruka was also frowning at the young Uchiha. "Well, I wouldn't mind having you go up against Naruto, Sasuke," he began sternly, "but you're still a fresh genin out of the academy who is currently speaking to a fellow shinobi of higher rank, so watch your tone." Sasuke scoffed but said nothing, instead directing his gaze at the blonde male. Iruka sighed tiredly as he gestured towards the sparring ring. "Would Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto come forth to the ring?" he announced. Without hesitation, Sasuke stepped into place, smug smile plastered on his face, confident of an easy victory and to finally show his Naruto just how weak her so-called brother was as compared to him. Naruto on the other hand just took his position opposite of him, not before waving at the cheers from Naruto and Kiba to kick the Uchiha's hide. "Alright, the rules are the same as before. First one to knock your opponents out of the ring or couldn't continue wins. Fighters ready?" Both boys slipped into their respective taijutsu stances, not taking off their eyes of their opponents. A deathly tense atmosphere loomed over the sparring grounds, the fresh genin not daring to take their eyes off the spar, with Sasuke's fangirls stating, "He's got this in the bag," and, "The new kid will never stand a chance," and the other half rooting for the newly arrived blonde. Naruto closed his eyes, centering himself as he warmed up his chakra coils. The familiar feeling of warmth coursing through his veins was as welcoming as a bowl of miso ramen. Sasuke, seeing his opponent close his eyes, smirked in triumph at the supposed resignation, feeling more assured of his victory. "Hajime!" At Iruka's shout, Naruto's eyes widened in shock when Sasuke closed the distance between him and Naruto in less than a few seconds, and her heart clenched painfully when he was about to land the decisive finishing blow on the Uzumaki male, hoping for a fast victory. And once again to everyone's shock and amazement, like Kiba before him, Sasuke's fist only managed to hit air, his onyx eyes widening in shock. "What the?" Sasuke started to say, but couldn't finish his sentence when he felt a sharp pain in his gut. Looking down, his eyes widened in pain and stunned realization when he saw Naruto's fist driving deep into his stomach, azure eyes staring deep into the Uchiha's soul. The entire class gawked in stunned surprise and even Naruto had to suppress a surprised gasp. Although she was the only genin in her graduating class who was capable of taking on Sasuke in taijutsu one-on-one, she wasn't as fast as him, and even she would have had a hard time fighting him with his advantage and speed. But Naruto basically sidestepped the Uchiha's attack at the last possible moment, proving without a doubt which one of the two fighters was superior in both speed and reflexes. Sasuke winced in pain as he staggered back towards his starting point, with Naruto not even moving an inch from his own spot. Sasuke's onyx eyes flared in utter fury as he growled audibly at being hit. In all his years spent in the academy, never once had anyone landed a hit on him, with the exception of Naruto, who he'd found to be his equal. None of the other genin could even match up to him in taijutsu. To be upstaged by this no-name clan-less orphan who just showed up was extremely degrading to the Uchiha's pride. But Sasuke had already planned to remedy that. Sasuke launched himself at the blonde again, closing the distance before bringing his leg up to kick his head, which Naruto ducked effortlessly under it. Sasuke then followed up with a series of small jabs and punches, intending on probing the blonde's defenses, only to find that every attack was either dodged or deflected like they were nothing, which infuriated Sasuke even more as he blindly charged again and again, with Naruto dodging and deflecting in kind as well. Sasuke growled in anger when he saw the blank look on the blonde's face, appearing as if he was not taking the spar seriously. But unknown to him, Naruto was conversing mentally with his tenant while muscle memory and reflexes did all the work for him at the moment. Kit, do you really have to toy with him that much? You'd come off as showing off. Kurama stated, amusement clear in his voice. I mean, he's still a bastard and all and still with the stick up his ass, but aren't you going a little too far? Even if his ego needed to be taken down a peg or two? He asked with a knowing grin, causing Naruto to look up mentally at the Biju with a small blush on his face, which was twisted in a frown while his real body fought with Sasuke, if one could call it a fight. I don't like the vibe he was giving off towards Naruto-chan. Naruto explained embarrassedly, and you know I can sense emotions thanks to you, right? Well, I sensed his intentions, which I think you felt it too, he growled at end as he watched his body slug it out with the last Uchiha, who was visibly showing signs of tiring out. Kurama sighed and chuckled. Yeah, I felt it. Sounds to me like you are jealous, kid. Naruto's blush returned full force as he spluttered, and no. I was just looking out for Naruto-chan. Yeah, that's it. He laughed awkwardly as he shuffled his feet in water of the sewer of his mindscape, trying to laugh off his situation, before eventually hanging his head in defeat. Yeah, I'm jealous. Figures. Can it, Kurama? Naruto retorted angrily. What would you do if someone looks at your most precious person like some trophy to be won or meat to be bought? He asked rhetorically, causing Kurama to nod in understanding even if he knew that he too was angry at the raven-haired Uchiha. I can't stand it when people look at her like that. The Kyuubi no Kitsune chuckled as he slowly stood up and stretched. He could already tell that his container cared for his new sister more than a brother should, and he respected and supported him for it. Then by all means, kick his ass. He encouraged, a manic grin on his snout. All Uchihas needed to be beaten down a peg or two, and I'm speaking from experience here. The blonde sage nodded as he grinned. That's the plan, Kurama. Back in the real world, Sasuke was cursing internally as he stood across from the blonde Dobi, panting as he tried to regain his breath. For the past 10 minutes, he and Naruto had fought with him still attacking and the blonde still defending. Sasuke couldn't remember the last time he was this tired, not even when he had sparred with him. What's more infuriating was that the blonde still looked daisy fresh even from the non-stop fighting and was still full of energy, mocking him with that same blank look on his rugged face. The graduating class was also stumped that the Rookie of the Year was being outlasted by the newcomer, as they had expected the fight to end fairly quickly like Kiba's, with either Sasuke or Naruto winning. But it seemed to most of the shinobi to be there that the blonde was purposely stalling and prolonging the fight, and for what purpose than to tire out the Uchiha, they didn't know. Naruko frowned as she contemplated on her brother's motives in his match against Sasuke. Carefully putting the pieces together in her head through her observations and past experiences with both boys, she couldn't be more perplexed. For one thing, Naruto was very confident that her Oni-chan can win this fight without much effort and outright dominate the Uchiha, but for some reason beyond her comprehension, he didn't. Instead, he was choosing to obviously toy with Sasuke by just sidestepping and deflecting his strikes. From the short time that she had known Naruto, she knew he wasn't the kind of person to toy with his opponents, and the only reason he even resorted to this kind of display was Naruto then thought back to Sasuke's past interactions with her. The looks he gave her, the way he talked to her and her alone and not his fangirls who he wouldn't even give them the time of day, and judging by how well her brother judged a person's character, then it all clicked. A blush slowly crept up Naruto's cheeks as she finally understood her brother's motives. It was all out of jealousy of Sasuke. Then her thoughts whirled towards her brother actually jealous of her interactions with other boys and the slight possibility that he could like her. She shook her head to clear the insane thoughts as she focused her attention back to the fight. After all, in her mind, she would always be the little sister in Naruto's eyes, no more, no less. So, why did her heart felt like breaking when she had thought that? "Stop stalling, you bastard," Sasuke shouted as he panted from the exertion. "Fight me like a true shinobi." "True shinobi?" Naruto parroted, voice amused, as he chuckled lightly. "Sasuke, if I fought you like a true shinobi, you would have probably been dead the moment you charged me." He lectured, ignoring the look of fury on the Uchiha's face. "That's it," Sasuke yelled as he pulled out a kunai, ignoring the alarmed shouts of Iruka and the others as he charged. "I'll kill you." Naruto sighed as he nodded to Iruka, who quickly nodded back with a concerned frown, thus giving the blonde the go-ahead for an all-out spar. Then his calm azure eyes briefly clashed with concerned purple ones of his precious person, eyes which shone with love that was meant only for him and him alone, and he smiled back. Before backhanding Sasuke in the face when he tried to jab the kunai into his skull while Naruto was distracted, before locking his right arm in a hold. Twisting the raven head's arm slightly, Sasuke let out a cry of pain as he dropped the kunai he was holding before Naruto kneed his stomach and punched him in the face, making the boy fly back and land on the ground with a painful thud. As Sasuke tried to stand, he was once again sent skidding back when a knee connected with the side of his head. Naruto gasped in amazement as she watched the fight. Naruto was completely outclassing Sasuke. Amazing, she breathed, with the lavender-eyed Hyuga beside her nodding in affirmation. Sasuke growled as he spat out blood from his mouth, eyes flaring in fury. No way was he letting this doby steal his rightful place as one of the best. It was time to end this. "I'll kill you for that." He started making hand signs as he flared his chakra, making Iruka call out in shock. "Uchiha Sasuke, stand down. Now." Iruka boomed, but it was too late as Sasuke had finished the hand signs as Naruto readied himself for the oncoming attack. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Fire release. Great fireball technique, the raven-haired boy cried out before a huge fireball erupted from his mouth, heading quickly for Naruto. Sasuke had a smirk on his lips when he saw his attack heading towards his opponent. He didn't care if he was a fellow shinobi, in his eyes, the blonde male was weak if he couldn't dodge a jutsu like that. Seeing the attack, Naruto only raised a surprised eyebrow before smirking, pulling out a single, long fuinjutsu sealing scroll from his utility pouch before suspending it in front of him with his chakra with the array facing the attack. Holding a ram seal in place, Naruto murmured, "Fuka Hoin." Fire sealing method. Naruto was beside herself with both anger and extreme worry. Anger at Sasuke for using such a dangerous elemental technique in a friendly spar, and extreme worry for Naruto who was on the receiving end of the attack. Once she saw the fireball getting closer to her newfound family member, she instinctively rushed forward but was immediately held back by both Hinata and, surprisingly, Kiba. "No, let me go," she cried, reaching out towards Naruto. "Oni-chan." Suddenly, just as the fireball was upon Naruto, something extraordinary happened. Multiple light blue strands of vapor like chakra emerged and started wrapping themselves around the ball of flames. The graduating class and Iruka were behind Sasuke when he made the attack, thus the fireball was blocking their sight on Naruto, before they started constricting around it, causing the fireball to distort and waver before it began to lose its distinctive ball-like shape. The flames were seemingly sucked towards something, which everyone found out to be a scroll of some kind with multiple different words on it which left the center empty, before disappearing entirely into the scroll. And standing behind while holding the scroll in place, was a smirking Uzumaki Naruto who was still holding a ram seal in place. He smiled cheekily at the stunned visage of Sasuke. "Fuka Hoin, success," he said, as a kanji for seal emerged from the center of the once empty space, glowing bright red before dying down. Everyone was stunned by the display, None more so than Iruka, who recognized Fuinjutsu when he saw one. Incredible. To be able to utilize the sealing arts in such a fashion in combat. Naruto sure is something else, he thought in amazement. The rest of the class was also shocked into silence as they tried to grasp what exactly happened in the past few minutes. Naruko on the other hand was silently crying tears of relief at seeing her precious person unharmed, as she cried into her best friend's beige jacket. She had thought him dead for just a moment when the jutsu hit, and was immensely relieved when Naruto had pulled a Fuinjutsu scroll out of nowhere and saved his hide. Sasuke was also in shock but also slight disappointment when he saw him, and he suddenly blurted out, "How did you do that?" He demanded angrily, "I saw you engulfed by my jutsu, before whatever you did cancelled it out." Naruto chuckled as he shook his head in amusement. "How naive of you, Uchiha Sasuke. You'd think a low-ranked jutsu like that could kill me." Naruto chuckled harder as he held out a scroll in his right hand. "All I had to do was to seal away your fireball with a simple application of Fuinjutsu. Pretty handy branch of the shinobi arts if I do say so myself." Then, the cheerful expression was gone, replaced by an icy cold demeanor, "And I will overlook this supposed attempt on my life, Uchiha-san, and not report you to Hokage-sama to have your license revoked. But I assure you, the next time you try something like this." Naruto's icy gaze turned emotionless as he ground out the last words he needed to say, "I will kill you." Sasuke, out of character even for him, nodded as sweat fell from his forehead. For some reason he couldn't comprehend, he seriously believed that the blonde in front of him would carry out the threat, easily and effortlessly, and it was best not to anger the blonde any longer, yet. Not until he can take the blonde's power as his own. He was horribly snapped out of his power-hungry musings when Naruto suddenly appeared in front of him, causing Sasuke's eyes to widen in shock as his brain finally remembered. The spar was still ongoing. The next few moments saw Sasuke effectively becoming Naruto's punching bag as the blonde boy rained hell down upon the last Uchiha. No matter what the raven-haired boy did to block the incoming attacks, Naruto would effortlessly slide past his defenses to hit him hard in several of his undefended areas. Kidney, stomach, thighs, biceps, face, chest, and the list went on as Naruto rained blow after blow after blow to Sasuke's body, remembering only to bruise and not debilitate. With one last punch, Naruto sent the Uchiha flying out of the ring and onto the ground with a painful thud. Sasuke groaned painfully, holding his bruised sides as Iruka came up towards them. He began eloquently before clearing his throat and stated clearly. "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto." Stunned silence ensued, before it was broken when all the genin who rooted for Naruto to win let out joyful whoops while the others let out disappointed groans. Sasuke's fangirls meanwhile were far too worried about their lord and savior Uchiha Sasuke to be letting out any kinds of joyful or depressed noises. Ino and Sakura in particular fought for who would help their Sasuke-kun to tend to his injuries. Once Sasuke, under his own power, was able to stand on his own, Iruka went up to him before slugging him in the face. This act earned a lot of gasps from everyone present, most prominently the leaders of the Sasuke fan club. Sasuke merely took the blow, but his eyes clearly burned in anger for the perceived slight. That, Iruka began menacingly, was for breaking one of the fundamental rules of friendly spars: no elemental ninjutsus or weapons. If Naruto was hurt or killed by you in this spar, you would have your shinobi license revoked, and I would have suggested to Hokage-sama to expel you from the shinobi program. Iruka then sighed as he coughed into his fist, gaining everyone's attention after they were snapped out of their awe-induced stupor. Due to Uchiha Sasuke's breaking of the code of conduct during the spar by purposefully intending to harm a fellow shinobi through the use of a lethal C-rank offensive ninjutsu, Uzumaki Naruto would win the spar by default. He explained with a stern look on his face, earning a chorus of nods. Seeing as Naruto won in the end, that is currently a non-issue. He turned to the brooding Uchiha, his face showing that of disappointment, and as for you Sasuke, good thing Naruto wasn't harmed or killed during that little display, or you will be court-martial led by the village's shinobi law, and never become a shinobi again. It was also a good thing that Naruto didn't decide to press any charges against you, so you're free to go, but... Iruka's eyes narrowed as he spoke seriously. I can't guarantee that you'll be let off if this happens again, even with the council's support. Iruka added when he noticed the Uchiha's smirk, which was lost the moment he said that. Iruka sighed tiredly, feeling as if he were 50 rather than his age of 26, and looked over to his side when he saw Naruto approaching with a calm look on his face. "Naruto, are you alright?" Iruka asked, before he glared at Sasuke to shush him from making further comments. Naruto shrugged as he dusted the imaginary dust off his clothes. "I'm okay. No harm done seeing as I've negated his attacks anyhow," he said. Iruka shook his head as he graded the last of his papers. Iruka looked up as he turned the clipboard over to give it to Sasuke, who was still glaring at the blonde. Then his disinterested onyx orbs slowly widened before he angrily threw the clipboard to the ground and stomped, limped, really, away. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his former future best friend's actions. As he picked up the clipboard, he noticed Iruka's gaze on him as he read through his grades, and he dropped it again when Naruto and her friends slowly approached them, some still shaken up by the past minute's events. Iruka chuckled, amusement clear in his tone. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he joked, making Naruto look up at him in shock. "But Iruka-sensei," he began, eyes not believing what they were seeing, as the rest of the class that stayed behind remained confused. "These can't be my points. I mean, I didn't actually do anything that amazing," he said the last part in a light whisper so that only he could hear. The class was still confused about the blonde's reaction to his points, and they were wondering if he did well enough to pass. Judging by the spars earlier, they knew for sure that Naruto would have passed with flying colors. "Yes, Naruto." Iruka picked up the clipboard again and skimmed through it once more. "You scored higher than any of the genin we tested thus far in the history of Konoha, on par with that of Uchiha Itachi and Hitaki Kakashi." The whole class gasped in shock and awe, while also feeling a little bit intimidated by the blonde. The names Uchiha Itachi and Hitaki Kakashi had been synonymous with a prodigy in the shinobi arts in Konoha, as one was the name of the traitor who murdered the Uchiha clan in one night, and the other was a renowned shinobi infamous for his moniker of Sharingan no Kakashi, the copy ninja. If one were to be on par with such legendary figures, they were in a class of their own. And Naruto was proving to be one of them. Iruka looked at the blonde boy with a fond smile, the same one the man wore back in his time when he was proud of what his favorite student did, and it made Naruto tear up slightly on the inside. "Congratulations Naruto, you are officially a genin." Naruto grinned as he pumped his fists. "Alright, thanks a bunch sensei," he said. "Don't mention it," Iruka replied. "Now it's time to get back to class. The jonin are waiting." Iruka clapped his hands together to gather everyone's attention and they began shuffling back into the building. Naruto sighed once as he made his way towards the door, only to stop when he remembered something, the look of pure anguish and terror on her face just before the jutsu hit his ceiling scroll. He immediately whirled around to go look for her, before he was suddenly enveloped in a tight embrace, the familiar scent of vanilla and wildflowers filling his senses as he smiled sadly and hugged the lithe form back, already feeling his clothes starting to soak with tears as Naruto bawled her eyes out in his chest. He rubbed her back soothingly as he whispered comforting words into her ear, making her tense form relax, but she was still trembling and was still sobbing lightly. Naruto sniffed as she hoarsely said, "I thought I lost you." She stuttered fearfully, When I saw the flames hit you, I was so scared Oni-chan. I thought you were dead, and I was left alone again." She finished with a muffled sob as she buried her face deeper into his shirt, her grip strong as if afraid he would disappear if she let go, and making Naruto feel guiltier than ever for pulling his stunt on the Uchiha. "I didn't know what to do." Naruto sighed as he hugged her back tighter, and gently ran his hands through her silky blonde hair. "I'm so sorry Naruto-chan," he apologized sincerely, regret filling his voice. "I was stupid. I wasn't thinking straight when I fought Sasuke," he confessed as he continued to gently comb her hair. Naruto closing her eyes bliss at his ministrations. "I put myself in harm's way on purpose just to show off my fuinjutsu skills." He paused as he gnawed at his lower lip. "I am so sorry Naruto-chan, for scaring you like that." "You better," Naruto said with a sniff, pulling back so she can look into his azure orbs, violet eyes pleading. "Promise me, Oni-chan. No matter what happens, you will never leave me alone ever again." She placed her forehead on his own, her shorter height making it so that she would have to tiptoe slightly to do so, desperately fighting down her blush that threatened to form on her face. promise me, Oni-chan. I promise, Naruto replied without hesitation with a serious look as he fought the urge not to blush at their close proximity. That's my promise of a lifetime to you. Throughout his whole life, both old and new, he had only made 2 promises of that kind to 2 different people only. The first was to himself for promising to uphold his nindo, no matter the consequences. The second was to his teammate and former crush Sakura, who he promised to bring Sasuke back when he left Konoha in search of Orochimaru. And now, he was making his third, and possibly most precious, promise to the one person he would gladly give up his own life to protect. Naruto smiled tearfully as she hugged him again. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know how much that means to me. I know, Naruto replied as he led her through the doorway leading into the academy. More than you know, Naruto-chan. More than you know. Once the class had settled down from the excitement of seeing Naruto's skill firsthand and quietly and adamantly chatting away with each other, with a few girls shooting glances once in a while at the blonde boy, Iruka coughed once, gaining their attention as he gestured towards the doorway at the front of the classroom, where several men and women in Jonin garb were waiting expectantly. Alright class, your Jonin senseis will see to you now. Go with your assigned teams, and most importantly, good luck. Iruka encouraged them, receiving a chorus of cheers from the newly minted students as the Jonin quickly came in and called out their teams. Naruto sighed in amusement as he wrapped an arm around his sister's shoulders, the poor girl still stricken by the event a moment ago. He could have sworn if he were to move now, he would have certainly dragged Naruto along with him due to the death grip she had on his jacket, eliciting a chuckle of amusement from him. The Jinchuriki of Kurama looked around as he saw his peers being led out the door one by one, knowing that most if not all of them would not even pass the second exam. Then his eyes fell on a familiar shade of raven black hair and Naruto had to once again resist the urge to sigh in frustration when the other boy glared at him from his seat near the window. Ever since he had one-upped the Uchiha during the spar, the self-proclaimed Avenger had been busy brooding by himself at his usual seat, with the ever-vigilant Sakura right beside him trying to pester a response or better yet a date from him. Naruto had forgotten how annoying his former crush and teammate had been before he had gone on that training trip with Jiraiya, and he could clearly see history repeat itself right before his eyes. He would have wanted to do something about it, but wouldn't dare risk shifting the timeline too much and throw his chances of defeating Kagaya out the window. For now, he would just wait and see. His presence here had already altered some things in the timeline already, and that had the blonde worried. Teammate? A dark-haired woman with piercing red eyes and wearing clothes that looked like they were made of bandages asked, and Kiba, Hinata and Shino took their cue, follow me. The trio walked after the woman, who Naruto presumed to be Yuhi Kurenai, and saw Naruto exchanging waves with the Hyuga heiress and Naruto himself exchanging nods with the other male members of her team before they went out. Another Jonin, this time a man, who was sporting a goatee and beard while smoking a cancer stick in his mouth walked in sporting standard Jonin garb with the exception of a triangular waist cloth that held the kanji of fire on it. The man called for Team 10 and Shikamaru muttered a silent, troublesome. Before following Ino and Choji, the former literally dragging the lazy Nara all the way, making the Uzumaki siblings laugh. It was a miracle that the lazy genius had even bothered to pass his test and become a shinobi, when he would prefer to go cloud watching all day long. Naruto groaned as he remembered something. If he hadn't messed up the timeline, then there was a high chance that Team 7 would end up with the same sensei, and he knew they still have another 3 hours to wait, if memory served him right. Naruto perked up slightly as he smiled at Naruko, making the blonde beauty look up at him with cute curiosity. Say, it's almost lunchtime now Naru-chan. The girl blushed at his new pet name for her but still listened. Why don't we go to Ichiraku's? Since I don't have that much money, I'll ask Tuchi-oji if it's alright with him to put it on my tab. He said cheekily while scratching his cheek and the girl in his arms perked up at the mention of her favorite dish in the world. Less than a heartbeat later, Naruko was pulling her brother out the door faster than he could say goodbye to Iruka before disappearing around the corner, leaving behind an amused teacher and 2 confused preteens. Sakura scowled as she was confused by the 2 blondes' actions, and it made her curious. Where are they going at this time? Aren't we supposed to be meeting up with our new sensei? She asked in her usual haughty tone which elicited a sigh from Iruka and a scoff from Sasuke. Well, it seems they both had got the right idea to take their lunch first before meeting your new sensei, Haruka said with a knowing grin, making the two genin look confused. Sasuke's more subdued than Sakura's, and if they've done their research, your Jonin sensei's tardiness is as legendary as his reputation. And with that, Haruka packed up his things and left, leaving the two alone. Sakura fidgeted as she slowly turned around to face Sasuke, who was still staring out the window. Anyo, if it's not much of a trouble for you, how about we have lunch together, to get to know each other better, she asked with a small blush. The raven-haired Avenger turned to look disinterested at her before he scoffed audibly, standing up and brushing her off as he made his way out of the building, the pink-haired girl gaining a disheartened look on her face as she diligently trailed behind her crush. Silently, at the back of her mind, she wished that she had a brother as cool and good-looking as Naruto's own. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.